See, Gideon Rusk pressed the barrel of his rifle against the barn door and kicked it open so hard the hinges screamed. See, get away from him. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. See, 17 years of watching men flinch at that voice had taught him exactly how quiet to keep it. See, I said, get away from that man, Mara. Right now. Mara Whitlock was on her knees in the straw, a strip of torn cloth wrapped around her hands, her fingers pressing against a wound that hadn't stopped bleeding in the hour since she'd found him. See, she didn't move. He'll die, she said. Then he dies. Gideon stepped into the barn. See, that ain't your problem, and it sure as hell ain't mine. See, she looked up at him, this man she'd worked for since she was 12, this man who'd taken her in after her grandfather passed and called it charity every single day since, and she made a choice. See, she didn't move. If you've ever been forced to choose between doing what's right and keeping the only roof over your head, then you already know exactly what was running through Mara Whitlock's mind in that moment. See, and if you've never had to make that choice, well, see, keep watching. Because what happened next changed everything. See, before we go any further, if stories like this move you, if you believe one act of courage can turn a life completely upside down, I want you to subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell. See, we tell stories every week that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. See, drop a comment and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. See, and if it touches you, leave a like. It takes 2 seconds and it means the world. See now. Let's go back to that barn. The stranger had been there since before sunup. See, Mara had found him when she went to check on the water troughs at 4 in the morning, which was her job, had been her job for 5 years. See, checking water in a valley, where water was the difference between a ranch staying alive and a ranch becoming a graveyard. See, the drought had been going on for 11 months. See, the creek that gave Iron Creek Ranch its name had turned into a thin brown trickle that barely reached the first bend anymore, and Gideon Rusk had been in a foul mood since spring and showed no signs of climbing out of it. See, she'd heard something in the barn, a sound she couldn't quite name, not an animal sound, not the shifting of horses or the scrape of a hoof against the boards. See, something lower than that, something with a different kind of pain in it. See, she pushed the barn door open and held up her lantern. See, he was crumpled against the far wall between 2 bales of hay, one leg bent wrong, one arm pressed against his ribs like he was trying to hold himself together from the outside. See, his coat was dark, with dried blood across the shoulders, and his face, what she could see of it, was swollen on the left side in a way that meant somebody had hit him more than once, and meant it. See, Mara stood in the doorway for a full 5 seconds. See, she was not a naive girl. See, she had grown up on this land, had grown up around men who solved problems with their fists and their horses and their silence, and she knew that a beaten stranger in a barn in the middle of the night did not usually mean anything simple or safe. See, she knew all of that. She had known it even at 12, when the world had already taken her parents and handed her over to a man like Gideon Rusk as though that was a fair trade. See, she walked in anyway. He was breathing. That was the first thing she checked. See, she crouched down beside him and held the lantern close enough to see his chest moving, and something in her own chest released a knot she hadn't realized she'd been holding. See, hey. She kept her voice low because sound carried in the dark, and she didn't want to pull anyone else out here yet. See, hey mister, can you hear me? He made a sound. Not words, not quite. See, but his eyes moved under the closed lids. You're in a barn, she said. See, Iron Creek Ranch. I don't know how you got here, but you're here now, and you're hurt bad. She looked at his arm, at the angle that was all wrong. See, your arm might be broken. I'm going to go get water and some cloth, and I'll come back. See, I'm not leaving you. I'm just getting what I need. See, she didn't know why she told him that last part. He probably couldn't hear her. See, but she said it anyway, because she knew what it felt like to be left somewhere and wonder if anyone was coming back. See, she got the water from the bunkhouse, filled a tin basin without waking the hands, found the old medical kit that hadn't been properly stocked in 2 years, but still had some clean cloth and a bottle of iodine that was nearly empty. See, she took the blanket off the end of her own cot. She came back. See, she spent the next hour working. She cleaned the gashes on his head and shoulder the best she could. See, she splinted his arm with a length of flat board from the wall and strips of cloth torn from the hem of her oldest dress. See, she got water into him slowly, a few drops at a time until he started swallowing more steadily, until some of the gray left his face. See, she pulled the blanket over him. She sat back on her heels and looked at what she'd done and thought it was probably not enough. See, that he needed a real doctor and not a ranch girl who'd learned field medicine from a grandfather who'd once been a sergeant and believed that knowing how to close a wound was as important as knowing how to use a rifle. See, she was still sitting there when the sun started coming up. See, and that was when she heard Gideon's boots on the hardpack outside. See, she should have been in the fields already. She knew that. See, the water troughs needed checking, and the cattle needed moving to the east pasture, and Calder Boone, the foreman, would already be looking for reasons to tell Gideon she was falling behind on her work. See, she was always a target for Calder. Had been since she was 15, and made the mistake of publicly correcting his count on the cattle numbers and turning out to be right. See, some men never forgot things like that. Gideon came through the barn door and stopped. See, he looked at the stranger. He looked at the splint, the clean cloth, the basin of water pink with diluted blood. See, he looked at Mara. What in the name of he stopped himself? See, breathed through his nose. Started again, quieter, which was worse. See, who told you to touch him? Nobody. Who told you to use our water on a stranger? See, nobody told me anything. I found him and he was dying, and I helped him. See, Gideon walked up to the stranger and stood over him, studying him the way he studied cattle, looking for value, looking for cost, looking for neither. See, his jaw worked slowly. He's nobody, Gideon said. See, some drifter who wandered in off the trail and collapsed. See, probably drunk, probably running from something. He turned back to Mara. See, you wasted water. You wasted cloth. You wasted time that you owed to me. See, he would have died. Then he would have died. He said it the same way someone might say the weather had turned or a fence needed mending. See, a fact, a condition to be accepted. Get up. Get to work. See, we'll put him on his horse when he wakes up and point him toward the road. See, he can't ride. His Ara. He said her name like it was a period at the end of a sentence. See, get to work. She stood up, and she looked at Gideon Rusk, at his pale eyes, his sun-cracked face. See, his hands that had held this land for 20 years, through drought and debt, and the kind of grinding hardship that either made a man generous or made him into something else entirely, and she thought he wasn't always like this. See, she could remember a version of him from years ago that was harder to hate. See, but that version was long gone, if it had ever been real at all. See, no, she said. The word sat in the air between them like something dropped from a great height. See, Gideon didn't move, didn't blink. What did you say to me? See, I said no. Her voice was steadier than she expected. See, I'm not leaving him. Not until he's stable enough that leaving him won't kill him. See, you can do what you need to do, but I'm not moving. See, 3 seconds passed. Calder Boone appeared in the barn doorway behind Gideon, drawn by the silence the way predators are always drawn to something gone wrong. See, he had a natural instinct for other people's trouble. See, he stood there with his thumbs hooked in his belt and the beginning of a smile on his face that Mara had always wanted to hit clean off. See, problem, Calder said. No problem, Gideon said. See, he turned away from Mara and walked toward the door, and for one moment she thought that was it, that it was over, that she'd somehow won some small version of this argument. See, then he stopped in the doorway. You're done here, he said. See, without turning around. Pack what you can carry. You're off this ranch by sunrise. See, the smile on Calder's face finished forming. Mara said nothing. See, she turned back to the stranger and checked the cloth on his arm where it had shifted slightly during the noise of the confrontation, and her hands were shaking, but she made them stop, made them do what they needed to do. See, because she had learned very young that hands that shook got you nowhere. See, the stranger's eyes opened, just barely, just enough. See, he looked up at her from inside whatever pain he was carrying, and his eyes, she would think about his eyes, later, when everything else had already changed, were calm in a way that had no business being there on a man in that condition. See, not the calm of someone who didn't feel things, the calm of someone who'd felt things long enough to learn how to carry them. See, you should have left me, he said. His voice was rough, scraped down to almost nothing. See, now you've lost something. I haven't lost anything that was worth keeping, she said. See, that was what she told him. She meant it when she said it. See, but sitting in that barn, with the light coming in through the slats in the walls, and the sound of Calder Boone chuckling to himself outside, and the knowledge that she had nowhere to go after sunrise, nowhere in the world, see, she let herself feel the weight of what she'd just done. See, she had given up the only home she had, for a man she didn't know. See, and the strange thing, the thing that would take her months to fully understand, was that even then, even in that barn, with everything crumbling around her, she didn't wish she'd done it differently. See, she sat beside him through the rest of that morning, keeping the cloth clean and damp, making sure he drank when he could, talking to him in the low, steady way she used to talk to the horses when they were spooked. See, not really expecting him to respond, just filling the silence so it didn't swallow them both. See, by mid-morning he was more awake. The color in his face was still wrong, but the gray had faded some. See, he kept trying to use his splinted arm, and she kept firmly moving it back, and at some point he stopped fighting her about it with the resigned expression of a man who had learned not all battles were worth fighting. See, what's your name? She asked him. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. See, he finally said, Elias what? A pause. Vane. See, she filed that away without particular interest. She didn't need his last name. See, she just needed him breathing. I'm Mara, she said. See, I know. He saw her look, you told me earlier, when I didn't finish. See, I heard you say you weren't leaving. She didn't say anything to that. See, why didn't you? He asked. You didn't know me. You still don't know me. See, Rusk told you to leave me, and you've lost your position because you didn't. See, why? It was a genuine question. She could hear that. See, not testing her, not performing confusion, actually asking, the way someone asks when the answer matters to them. See, because you were dying, she said, and I could do something about it. See, that's the whole reason. He looked at the roof of the barn. See, that's simple, he said. That's simple. He was quiet for a long time after that. See, she thought he'd fallen asleep again. She was gathering the soiled cloths to take to the wash bucket when he spoke again, so quietly she almost missed it. See, I'll remember that, he said. What you did, you don't owe me anything, she said. See, I didn't do it so you'd owe me something. I know that. A pause. See, that's exactly why I'll remember it. She didn't know what to do with that, so she didn't do anything with it. See, she finished what she was doing and didn't look at him again for a while. See, outside she could hear the hands going about the work of the ranch, the distant low complaints of the cattle, the dry rattle of wind through the drought-killed brush along the fence line. See, inside there was the quiet sound of a man breathing more evenly than he had been a few hours ago. See, she had until sunrise to figure out where she was going. See, she had a small bag, 2 dresses, a blanket she'd taken back from him now that he was stable. See, her grandfather's silver locket with the photograph inside that she'd worn against her chest for 5 years and would not leave without. See, $12 folded into the lining of her boot. See, she had survived with less before, but she'd been younger then, and she hadn't known yet how big the empty spaces between one safe place and the next could get. See, she knew now. The knowing was a weight she carried differently than she had at 12. See, she sat in that barn until the last of the light went, and the evening cold started seeping through the boards, and somewhere in that final hour of waiting, she reached a place inside herself that she recognized. See, a place she'd found before in smaller versions of this same kind of reckoning. See, the place where the fear doesn't go away, but it stops being the loudest thing. See, she reached that place. She settled into it. She thought about her grandfather, about Everett Whitlock, who had been a big quiet man with a sergeant's straightness in his back and a habit of letting other people talk until they ran out of words. See, who had told her once that integrity wasn't something you showed the world. See, it was what you did when the world wasn't watching. See, she thought she'd done something he would have recognized tonight. See, she hoped so. Outside, somewhere in the dark, a cattle lowed long and mournful, and the dry wind moved through the broken valley. An Iron Creek ranch lay still and indifferent around the girl it had just thrown away. See, she didn't sleep. She sat up through the night keeping watch, her back against the stall post, the locket pressed between her palms. See, and in the darkest part of that night, just before the sky began to change, Elias Vane's calm, strange eyes opened one more time and found her in the dark. See, he didn't say anything, neither did she, but something passed between them in that silence that neither of them had a name for yet. See, something that would take months and loss and an entire reckoning with the past before either of them would understand what it had been. See, the night moved toward morning, and Mara Whitlock, orphan, former ranch hand, newly homeless at 17, held her grandfather's locket and waited for whatever came next. See, the sun came up the way it always did in that valley during the drought, hard and flat, and without any of the warmth that made morning feel like a beginning rather than a continuation of everything that had already gone wrong. See, Mara had watched it rise from inside the barn, and by the time the first real light was hitting the dust outside the door, Elias Vane was sleeping more steadily, his breathing slower, and more even than it had been through the night. See, his splinted arm resting across his chest at the angle she'd positioned it. See, she stood up. Her back ached from sitting against the post for hours, and her knees took a moment to remember how to work it properly, and she pressed her hand against the stall wall while the pins and needles worked their way through her feet. See, then she picked up her bag from the corner, where she'd left it the night before already packed, had been packed before Gideon finished walking out of the barn, because she'd known even before she said no to him, what the answer to that no would be, and she looked at Elias one more time. See, he looked better. Not good, not anywhere close to good. See, but better than the man she'd found crumpled in the straw the night before, and she told herself that had to be enough, because it was all she was going to get. See, she adjusted the cloth around his arm one final time. See, checked that the water tin was within reach of his good hand. See, did not let herself think too hard about what would happen to him after she was gone, about whether the hands would leave him alone, or whether Calder Boone would find some reason to make his life difficult. See, because thinking about that would keep her in that barn all day, and she had already paid the price of staying longer than Gideon had wanted her to. See, the debt was settled. She had done what she could. See, she walked out into the thin early morning and let the barn door fall shut behind her. See, the ranch was already moving. Two of the hands were crossing the yard from the bunkhouse toward the equipment shed, not looking at her. See, which meant they'd heard what happened and had made the calculation most people make when something ugly goes down around someone without power they looked away. See, she didn't blame them exactly, but she didn't forgive them either, and she filed that away in the part of herself where she kept things she was honest about. See, she walked toward the main gate. She had her bag over one shoulder, the locket under her shirt against her skin where she always kept it, and $12 in her boot that she planned to make last as long as possible. See, Red Hollow was 9 miles east. She'd been there twice in 5 years, once with Gideon to pick up supplies, and once alone when he'd sent her to settle a bill with the feed store. See, she knew the road. She knew the town was big enough to have a hotel and a diner, and maybe a general store that needed stock work, or a kitchen that needed someone to wash dishes. See, she had done harder things than find work in a town. See, she told herself that. She kept telling herself that as she walked through the gate and turned east on the trail. See, the morning was quiet around her. The trail cut through dry scrubland, the brush on either side the color of old straw, everything thirsty, everything waiting for rain that kept not coming. See, her boots raised small clouds of dust with each step. See, The air already had the edge of heat in it that said the afternoon was going to be brutal, and she adjusted the strap of her bag and put her head down and walked. See, she had been walking about 40 minutes when she heard the horses behind her. See, she didn't turn around right away. She knew the sound of Iron Creek horses. She'd been feeding and watering them for 5 years, and she knew their gaits the way you know the particular creak of a door in a house you've lived in long enough. See, 2 horses moving at a trot, coming up fast from the direction of the ranch. See, she turned around. Calder Boone was in front. Wes Talbot was behind him, a younger hand who wasn't cruel exactly, but who had made a career out of following whatever direction Calder pointed him. See, they pulled their horses up about 10 feet from her, and Calder sat in the saddle the way he always sat, like the horse was an extension of a power that already belonged to him. See, like everything around him was something he was deciding whether to bother with. See, Mara. He said her name the way Gideon had, like a period. See, then he leaned forward on the saddle horn. You took something that belongs to the ranch. See, she looked at him. I didn't take anything. Mr. Rusk says different. He swung down from the horse in that lazy way that was never actually lazy. That was the studious movement of a man who wanted you to see how little effort this was costing him. See, says you took supplies from the barn. Medical supplies. See, water. I used them on an injured man who was dying in your barn, she said. See, if Gideon wants reimbursement for half a bottle of iodine and some old cloth, I'll give him 50 cents, and he can consider us square. See, Calder smiled. It was the kind of smile that had nothing to do with anything being funny. See, we're going to need to search your bag. No, you're not. See, he took a step toward her. Behind him, Wes shifted in his saddle, not coming down, but repositioning. The way you reposition when you're about to be asked to do something you're not sure you want to do, but are pretty sure you're going to do anyway. See, this doesn't have to be unpleasant, Calder said. See, you riding after a woman who's already been fired and accusing her of theft is pretty unpleasant already, Mara said. See, you've got a long way to go before you get to pleasant from here. See, something moved in his face. See, she'd annoyed him. See, which was dangerous. See, and she knew it was dangerous. See, but she was 17 years old, and she had just spent a night on the barn floor, and she did not have the patience this morning to perform the particular kind of harmlessness that men like Calder needed to see from women in order to feel at ease. See, hand over the bag, he said. No. She got 1 second of warning, just one, just the shift of his weight forward before his hand came out and grabbed the strap of her bag and yanked. See, she kept hold of it, which she knew, even as she did, it was not the smart thing to do, but her hands acted before her head could catch up with the situation. See, and for a moment, they were just standing there on the empty trail, both holding the bag and neither letting go. See, then Calder twisted the strap hard and pulled, and the bag tore free from her shoulder, and she stumbled sideways and caught herself on one knee in the dirt. See, he opened the bag and dumped it. Everything she owned fell out onto the dry ground. See, the 2 dresses, the blanket which was already worn thin at the edges. See, a small tin of dried beans she'd thought to take because they were technically hers. She'd bought them herself with her own wages 2 months ago. See, a comb that had belonged to her mother that was missing 3 teeth. See, the small, leather-bound journal that she'd never written much in but had kept because her grandfather gave it to her the year before he died. See, Calder crouched over it all and went through it with the efficiency of someone who did this kind of thing often enough that the awfulness of it no longer registered. See, there was no locket in the bag. The locket was against her skin where it always was, where no one was going to find it without a fight that would leave marks on at least one of them. See, he stood up. He knew. She could see that he knew. He'd been looking for the locket specifically, had known what Gideon sent him for, and it wasn't there, and now he had to decide what to do about that. See, his eyes went to her shirt collar. You want to check under my clothes, she said quietly. You better be prepared for what that cost you. See, the words came out flat and cold, and she meant every syllable, and she watched that land on him, watched him weigh it. See, Calder Boone was a lot of things. He was mean and he was petty, and he exercised the small power he had over people with the dedication of someone who had never had any other kind. See, but he was not entirely stupid. He knew what accusations came from what actions, and he knew that some lines were expensive even for foremen of struggling ranches. See, he stepped back. "Pick up your garbage," he said, "and stay off Iron Creek land." See, he turned back to his horse, and that was when it happened. See, whether it was the exhaustion of the night, or the anger she'd been managing all morning, or the sight of her mother's comb lying in the dirt with its 3 missing teeth pointing up at the empty sky. See, something inside her snapped loose from wherever she'd been keeping it tied down. See, she didn't think. She reached down, picked up the tin of beans, and threw it at Calder Boone's back. See, it hit him between the shoulder blades with a dull thud that was somehow both satisfying and immediately terrifying, and he spun around with an expression on his face that she had never seen on him before and hoped sincerely never to see again. See, he crossed the distance between them in 4 steps. See, she didn't run. She should have. She knew even in that moment she should have, but her feet didn't move, and then it was too late because he had her arm, his grip hard enough to bruise, and he shoved her backward, and she went down hard in the dust. See, the air leaving her lungs in a single hard exit, and she lay there for a moment, just trying to get her breath back, while the dry ground pressed against her back, and the sky above was enormous and indifferent and very, very blue. See, she was trying to sit up, was partway there, when she heard something she didn't immediately recognize. See, a rifle shot. Not close, not aimed at anyone, but fired deliberately and clearly into the air. The kind of shot that is a sentence and not a question. See, then hoofbeats. Not 2 horses. More than 2 coming from the west, from the direction of the low ridge that ran behind the trail. See, and they were coming fast. Calder heard it too. See, he took his hand off her arm and stepped back and turned, and the expression on his face shifted into something she'd never seen there before, either something that looked unexpectedly like uncertainty. See, 6 riders came over the rise. They were riding well-kept horses, not ranch horses, the kind of horses that cost real money and were fed properly. See, and the 6 men on them were dressed in a way that was not the clothing of working hands, but of men who worked for someone who could afford to dress them properly. See, they spread out across the trail in a line and slowed to a stop about 20 feet from where Calder was standing. See, and in the center of the line, wearing a black riding coat that had no business looking that clean on a dusty morning trail, see, sitting straight in the saddle, despite the bandaging visible at his collar and the splint Mara herself had put on his arm, was Elias Vane. See, she was still sitting in the dirt. She stared at him. See, he looked different. Not in his face. The face was the same one she'd spent the night watching for signs of fever. The same swollen jaw. The same dark eyes that were calm in a way that had no right to exist in a man that hurt. See, but everything around him was different. The coat was different. See, the horse was different. The way the 6 men around him arranged themselves relative to him was very, very different. See, the man she had found dying in the straw was sitting in the center of 6 armed riders, looking like someone who had never in his life been in a position where someone else held the power. See, Calder found his voice first. "Who the hell are?" "Elias Vane," one of the riders said before Calder could finish. See, said it the way someone says a name when the name is supposed to mean something, and they are watching to see if it does. See, it did. She watched it happen in real time, watched the color leave Calder Boone's face, watched his jaw move without producing sound for 2 full seconds, watched his eyes go from Elias to the riders to Elias again. See, running some calculation in his head that was clearly not coming out in his favor. See, Mr. Vane, Calder started. His voice had changed. See, the whole register of it had changed, lower and careful now, the voice of a man walking very slowly across ice. See, we didn't know you were Gideon didn't say. See, get off your horse, Elias said. Just that, 3 words. See, quiet. Calder got off his horse. Wes Talbot, who had not spoken a single word through any of this, got off his horse too, apparently deciding that whatever was happening required him to be on the ground for it. See, Elias walked his horse forward, slowly, until he was close enough that Mara had to look up at him, from where she was still sitting. See, he looked down at her, and something crossed his face that was not pity. She was grateful for that, because she didn't think she could have stood pity right then. See, can you stand? He asked. Yes, she said. Are you hurt? See, she was. See, her arm was going to bruise where Calder had grabbed her, and her back ached from the fall, and there was dust in her hair and all over her dress, and she was sitting in the middle of a trail with everything she owned scattered in the dirt around her. See, she was hurt in more ways than the obvious ones, but she got her legs under her, and she stood up, and she met his eyes, and she said, I'm fine. See, he held that gaze for a moment. Then he swung down from the horse with a care that told her the ribs were still not good, the arm still not right, that getting on that horse this morning had cost him, and he'd done it anyway. See, he crouched down in the dirt beside her scattered belongings and began picking them up. See, Elias Vane, in his expensive black coat, on his knees in the trail dust, picking up Mara Whitlock's worn dresses and her tin of beans and her grandfather's leather journal. See, she stood there and could not think of a single word to say. See, he gathered everything carefully and put it back in the bag without speaking. See, he picked up her mother's comb last and looked at it for just a second at the 3 missing teeth before he placed it on top of everything else and handed the bag to her. See, then he stood up and turned to face Calder. You struck her, Elias said. See, I didn't. Calder stopped. Tried again. See, she threw something at me. She threw something at you, Elias repeated. See, he said it very mildly, the way you repeat something back to someone when you want them to hear how it sounds. See, a woman you were sent to intimidate, who you shoved to the ground, threw something at you. See, and that's your defense. Calder said nothing. 2 of the riders dismounted. See, they moved to either side of Calder with the efficient, practiced manner of men who did this kind of work regularly and had stopped thinking of it as remarkable. See, Calder looked at them, then at Elias, then back at them, and then he put his hands up in the way of a man who had made a fast calculation and decided that particular kind of cooperation was in his interest. See, they'll be turned over to the sheriff in Red Hollow, Elias said to the riders. See, assault and attempted robbery. Make sure Marshal Keene gets a full account. He looked at Wes. See, you. Were you told to come here and do this, or did you choose to? See, Wes opened his mouth and closed it. He was 23, maybe 24, and he had the face of someone who was only now fully understanding what kind of morning this had turned out to be. See, Calder said Gideon told Calder Were you going to stop him? Elias said. See, when he pushed her down. Were you going to stop him? See, a long silence. I don't know, Wes said quietly, and that honesty, that small, unwilling honesty, seemed to cost him something real. See, Elias looked at him for a long moment. Go back to the ranch, he said finally. See, you've got a decision to make about who you work for. See, I'd think hard about it. Wes took his horse and went. See, nobody stopped him. Mara had been watching all of this, with her bag held in front of her and her feet not quite feeling connected to the ground. See, she waited until the 2 riders had started back toward Red Hollow, with Calder walking between them before she turned to Elias. See, how did you get out here, she said. My arm is splinted, he said. See, you did good work. That is not the same as you being able to ride. See, it's approximately the same. He walked back to his horse, moving carefully, and did not try to pretend the ribs weren't giving him trouble. See, my men found me this morning after your ranch owner sent word to Red Hollow that there was a dead drifter in his barn they needed to collect. He paused. See, he sent word before sunrise. He thought I was dead or close enough to it that the distinction wasn't worth much. See, Mara processed that. He sent for people to collect your body before he even checked if you were. See, Gideon Rusk had other things on his mind. He turned to look at her. See, the morning sun was fully up now, and it caught the damage to his face clearly, the swelling, the yellowing bruises that were beginning their slow change of color. See, he's in debt to a great many people. He has been for 3 years. See, the cattle losses from this drought have made a situation that was already difficult into a situation that is no longer survivable. See, she stared at him. How do you know all of that? He was quiet for a moment, in the specifics is some way of someone choosing and what to keep back. See, because I came to this valley to find it out, he said. See, walk with me. There are things I should told you last night, and I would have, but I was occupied with not dying. See, she almost laughed. It surprised her, the almost laugh, the way it came up without permission from some part of her that was apparently still functional, despite everything. See, she adjusted her bag on her shoulder and fell in beside him as he led his horse slowly along the trail. See, the riders spread out at a respectful distance behind them. See, not so close as to make the conversation feel observed, but close enough that Mara was aware of them the whole time, aware of the particular quality of the silence they maintained, the silence of men who were paid well and were professional about it. See, my father's name was Thomas Vane, Elias said after a moment. See, he was in the war. He was infantry, not cavalry, which he always said meant he was the kind of man who had to think harder about survival because he didn't have a horse to help him run. He paused. See, in the winter of the last bad year, his company was retreating through a mountain pass in the kind of cold that kills people not by making them fall, but by making them stop caring if they do. See, 7 men were too badly wounded to make good time. See, the decision from above was to leave them. He said it simply. See, without judgment in his voice, which somehow made it worse than if he had judged. See, someone didn't leave them, Mara said. A sergeant stayed back. See, he was not ordered to. He was specifically told not to, in fact, because they were already losing people and they couldn't afford to lose more. See, he stayed anyway. See, he found a way to keep those 7 men alive through 3 days in that cold, found shelter, found enough to keep them from dying, and got them moving again when the rest of the company was found. Elias looked down at the trail ahead of them. See, my father was one of those 7 men. The valley was very quiet around them. See, the dry brush, the hot air already building, the thin sound of the distant cattle. See, he never forgot the sergeant's name, Elias said. See, he told me the story so many times I could recite it before I was 12. See, Everett Whitlock. He said the name like it was a debt he was going to spend the rest of his life figuring out how to repay. See, Mara had stopped walking. She didn't remember stopping. See, she was just standing on the trail with her bag hanging from her shoulder and the blood gone strange and loud in her ears. See, my grandfather's name was Everett Whitlock, she said. See, I know. How long have you known that Since before I came to this valley. He turned to face her. See, I spent 4 years trying to find your grandfather. See, by the time I had the information to find him, he had been gone for 2 years. See, but the people who told me about his death also told me he had a granddaughter. See, 17. Working at Iron Creek Ranch under a man named Gideon Rusk. Something moved in his face. See, I came to investigate Rusk. That was real, the debt situation, the cattle numbers not matching, the suspicion that he was covering losses through fraudulent sales. See, all of that is real, and I needed to see it for myself, which is why I came the way I did, without announcing myself. See, because announcing yourself tells what you're looking for, and then they have time to hide it. See, and the other reason you came? She said. To find Everett Whitlock's granddaughter, he said. See, and find out what she needed. She stood very still. See, the morning pressed around her, hot and dry and relentless. See, she was aware of everything with strange sharpness, the weight of the bag, the pressure of the locket against her breastbone, the sound of her own breathing. See, you were coming to find me, she said slowly, while I was being fired for saving your life. See, yes, he said it without flinching from how that sounded. See, I was. And I want you to understand something clearly. What you did last night, I did not arrange. See, I did not plan for that. I was found in that barn because Rusk's men caught me investigating his books, and what they did to me was not part of anything I designed. He met her eyes. See, you saved my life because you chose to, nothing else. See, she believed him. She wasn't sure yet if she wanted to believe him, but she did. See, your men found you this morning, she said. My men found me this morning. See, I told them to find you before we did anything else. He reached into his coat carefully, with his good arm, favoring the ribs, and he took out something she recognized before she could even properly see it. See, a pipe, old wooden, the bowl worn smooth in the particular way of something held and used by the same hands for decades. See, dark with age and care, he held it out to her, her grandfather's hands. See, she could see her grandfather's hands around that pipe, could see him sitting on the step outside the bunkhouse in the evenings, when Gideon let them have evenings, the smoke rising slow, him looking out at nothing and everything the way he did. See, my father kept it, Elias said. Your grandfather gave it to him in that mountain pass. See, said he wanted my father to have something to smoke if they made it out. See, he never smoked it. He just kept it. He paused. He died 4 years ago. See, he gave it to me and told me to find the man who owned it, or find what he'd left behind, and make sure they were all right. See, Mara took the pipe from Elias's hand. It weighed almost nothing. See, old wood-worn bowl, the ghost of tobacco in the grain. See, she held it and she didn't cry, because she was Everett Whitlock's granddaughter, and he had not raised her to cry on roadsides in front of strangers, but it was a near thing, closer than she usually let anything get. See, she closed her hand around it. He never told me, she said. See, about the war. About any of it, he wouldn't have, Elias said. See, my father said your grandfather spoke about the war the way men speak about things they did right quietly, and only when they had to, he watched her. See, he was not a man who wanted to be repaid, but that doesn't mean the debt isn't real. See, she looked up from the pipe. What are you saying? See, he was quiet for a moment, and in that moment, she could hear all 6 of his riders behind them, the creak of saddle leather, the patient breath of horses. See, and she understood suddenly that this conversation had been building toward something from the moment he first opened his eyes in that barn and looked at her with those impossible calm eyes. See, I'm saying that Iron Creek Ranch doesn't belong to Gideon Rusk anymore, Elias said. See, the paperwork completed this morning. My lawyers have been working on this since I knew the extent of his debts. See, he borrowed against the land 3 times over, and the men he borrowed from sold those debts to my holding company 6 weeks ago. He held her gaze. See, the ranch belongs to me. Mara absorbed that. You own it. See, I own it as of this morning, yes. She waited, because there was clearly more. See, I want to sign it over to you, he said. The trail was very quiet. See, somewhere far off, a bird called once and went silent. See, excuse me, she said. I want to transfer the deed of Iron Creek Ranch to Mara Whitlock, he said. See, not as a gift, not as charity, as the repayment of a debt my family has carried for 20 years to yours, and as fair compensation for the fact that you worked that land for 5 years and received wages that were, by any measure, see, not commensurate with what was asked of you. He paused. See, and because you saved my life, all 3 of those things. See, she stared at him. She was aware that her mouth had opened slightly, and she didn't do anything about it for several seconds. See, I don't know how to run a ranch, she said. You've been doing the work of running one for 5 years. See, I've been doing the work of a hand. That's not the same as. See, you kept the water tallies, he said. You managed the rotation schedule when Calder was drunk, which I understand was frequent. See, you knew the cattle numbers better than the foreman. He said it without particular emphasis, which meant he'd gotten it from somewhere, which meant someone had told him, which meant he had done considerable research on her specifically. See, you also clearly know field medicine, property assessment, and how to keep your head in a situation that would break most adults. See, I'm 17, she said. Yes, he said, and you'll learn what you don't know. See, you'll hire people who know what you don't. That's what ownership is. He held her gaze. See, but I need to know one thing first. Would you take it? See, she opened her mouth and closed it. She thought about what Iron Creek Ranch was. See, the land she had walked over for 5 years, the cattle she had helped feed and water through 11 months of drought. See, the fences she had mended and the tallies she had kept, and the nights she had sat in that bunkhouse listening to the dry wind and trying not to think too hard about how permanent her situation seemed. See, she thought about Gideon standing in that barn with his rifle and his pale eyes and his complete lack of hesitation. See, She thought about her grandfather, who had stayed in that mountain pass for 3 days in the cold because 7 men needed him to, and who had never said a word about it to anyone. She thought about the fact that she had $12 in her boot and a worn bag and nowhere to go. And she thought about the fact that none of that was actually what was holding her back from saying yes. What was holding her back was something harder to name. Something about not wanting the thing she'd done last night, the choice she'd made in that barn, to become something that got her something. She'd done it because it was right. She had not done it to be paid. If I take it, she said slowly, it can't be because I saved you. I need it to not be that. He'd looked at her for a long moment. Then take it because your grandfather saved my father, he said. And because you worked that land for 5 years and Gideon Rusk paid you a fraction of its worth. Take it for those reasons. What happened last night, he paused. Call that what it was. One person doing right by another. Let it stay that. She looked down at the pipe in her hand. Everett Whitlock, who had never talked about what he'd done, who had handed a stranger his own pipe in a frozen mountain pass and said, smoke this if we make it out. Who had come home from the war and raised a granddaughter, who had apparently inherited his specific and inconvenient inability to walk away from people who needed help. She closed her fingers around the pipe. All right, she said. It wasn't a big moment. She didn't feel the ground shift or the air change. She just said all right, standing on a dusty trail with everything she owned in a worn bag on her shoulder, and the morning kept being exactly what it had been, hot and dry and indifferent, and the pipe was warm in her hand. Elias nodded once. Then we need to go back to the ranch, he said. Before Gideon finishes deciding what to take when he runs. She looked at the road to Red Hollow, the road she had been walking toward, the road that had been the only plan she had. She looked at it for a moment. Then she turned around and faced the direction of Iron Creek Ranch, 9 miles west, and began walking. Elias swung up onto his horse beside her, with the careful deliberateness of a man who had not let his injuries fully land yet, but was aware they were coming. One of the riders brought another horse up, a good horse, dark brown, calm-eyed. You can ride? Elias said. I've been riding since I was 8, she said, and put her foot in the stirrup and got on. They rode back toward Iron Creek Ranch, the 6 men around them, and the morning pressing down hard on everything, and Mara held the reins in one hand and her grandfather's pipe in the other, and she did not look back at the road she'd been walking. She had looked back enough in her life. Whatever was coming, the ranch, the work, the learning, the 100 things she didn't know, yet it was all ahead of her. In the direction she was already moving. The horses picked up their pace. The dust rose around them, and the valley opened out wide, and the dry creek in the distance caught the light for just a second, thin and struggling, but still there, still running, still finding some way through. She kept her eyes forward. They rode in through the main gate at Iron Creek Ranch at 20 minutes past 9 in the morning, and the first person who saw them was a hand named Pete Garrow, who had been with the ranch for 11 years, and who dropped the coil of fence wire he was carrying when he saw Mara Whitlock riding at the center of 6 armed men in the company of the stranger from the barn, who was now wearing a black coat and sitting a horse worth more than Pete earned in a year. Pete stood and stared. Then he turned and went at a fast walk toward the main house, which told Mara everything she needed to know about who he'd decided to warn first. Elias watched this without visible reaction. He kept his horse at a steady pace across the yard, and his men spread out behind him in the particular formation of people who have done this kind of arrival before and know exactly how much space to occupy to communicate what they need to communicate without saying a word. Mara rode beside him and kept her face neutral and her back straight the way her grandfather had always kept his, and she noticed the hands coming out of the equipment shed and the bunkhouse to look. Noticed them the way you notice things when your awareness of your surroundings has sharpened to a point. See, everything bright and too clear the way it gets, when your body understands something significant is happening before your mind has fully caught up. See, Gideon came out of the main house before they reached the porch. See, he came out the front door and stood on the top step, and she could see immediately that he already knew something was wrong. See, Pete had reached him fast, or maybe Gideon had simply been preparing to leave, and this arrival had caught him mid-preparation, because he was wearing his good coat, the one he only wore for town. See, and there was a travel bag visible through the open door behind him, sitting on the floor of the hallway, half packed, its mouth open like an interrupted sentence. See, he looked at Elias. His face went through several things in quick succession. See, recognition came first, the recognition of the wounded man from the barn, dressed now in a way that made the barn and the barn floor and the decision to leave him there feel suddenly very different. See, then came the calculation, the rapid running of numbers that Mara had watched Gideon do her whole life with cattle and water and wages and supply costs. Only now the numbers being calculated were something else entirely. See, then came something she had never seen on Gideon Rusk's face before. See, fear, not the performance of concern or the management of discomfort, but actual fear, the kind that sits in the jaw and the set of the shoulders and the way the hands go still too deliberately against the body. See, Elias stopped his horse at the foot of the porch steps and looked up at Gideon. See, nobody spoke for a long moment, Mr. Rusk, Elias said finally. See, pleasantly almost. The pleasantness of it was worse than anger would have been. See, Gideon's jaw moved. I don't know who you think you are, he started. See, yes you do, Elias said. You've known who I am since Pete Garrow walked across this yard just now with that look on his face. See, and if Pete's news is what finished it for you, the people in Red Hollow who were talking have had my name since yesterday. He swung down from his horse and handed the reins to one of his men without looking. See, you've had longer than you've pretended. Gideon came down one step. See, you were trespassing on my land. Was I? Elias said it without a question mark. See, you came onto this property without permission. I came onto a property that was already being managed in a fraudulent manner, Elias said, to confirm for myself what my lawyers had been telling me for 8 weeks. See, I came because I do not make decisions about significant investments based on paperwork alone. See, I come and look. He let that sit for a moment. I looked. See, and then your men beat me and left me in your barn to die. See, Gideon's voice went quiet and careful. I don't know anything about that. See, yes, Elias said. You do. She had never heard anyone handle Gideon Rusk the way Elias Vane handled him in those 3 exchanges. See, Gideon had been the largest thing in her world for 5 years, the source of the rules, the source of the punishment, the source of the permanent low-grade threat that had shaped her entire existence on that land. See, and here was this man, standing at the foot of the porch steps with a splinted arm and damaged ribs, talking to him in a tone of voice he might have used to discuss the weather, and Gideon was going smaller with every word. See, something in her chest did a complicated thing she didn't have a name for yet. See, the deed transferred this morning, Elias said. My attorneys filed in Red Hollow at 8 o'clock. See Iron Creek Ranch. See all livestock. See all equipment. See all structures. See, he paused. See, you're standing on my land, Mr. Rusk, and I'd like to tell you now what happens next. See, Gideon stood very still. 3 of the hands had drifted close enough to hear. See, Pete Garrow was at the edge of the yard. A younger hand, Tommy Reeves, was up on the fence with his arms folded, watching with the careful attention of a man trying to figure out which way something was going to fall. See, what happens next, Gideon said slowly, is my lawyers. See, your lawyers are aware of the situation, Elias said. See, they've been made aware as of yesterday evening. I expect one of them tried to reach you this morning, and you may have chosen not to be reached. He glanced at the travel bag visible through the open door. See, that would explain the packing. Gideon said nothing. See, here's what is going to happen, Elias said. He was not raising his voice. See, he never raised it. You are going to take your personal belongings, your clothing, your personal papers, items that belonged to you before you acquired this ranch. See, You will leave the horses. You will leave the equipment. See, you will leave everything that belongs to this land, because this land and everything on it has been accounted for in the debt proceedings and is no longer yours to take. He paused. See, you have 2 hours. Gideon's face had gone a color she'd never seen on it before. See, you can't walk onto a man's property and tell him. See, it is not your property, Elias said. That's the part you need to hold on to. See, it stopped being your property when you borrowed against it 3 times over and then sold cattle you didn't own to cover payments you couldn't make. See, the law is very specific about that. He reached into his coat and produced a document folded in thirds, which he held out. See, one of his men took it and walked up the steps and held it out to Gideon. See, this is the transfer of deed. You'll note the date and the county seal. See, Gideon took the paper. He looked at it. See, his hands were shaking slightly, and he probably didn't know they were. But Mara could see it from where she sat on her horse. Those big hands that had pointed and ordered and threatened for 20 years, shaking over a piece of paper. See, he looked up from the document, and for the first time since they'd ridden in, his eyes went to Mara. See, she held his gaze. She had spent a lot of time over the years managing her expressions around Gideon Rusk, keeping them neutral, keeping them small. See, showing him as little as possible, because showing him things gave him ammunition, and he was the kind of man who used whatever ammunition he found. See, she had been very good at it. She was good at it now. See, but she didn't look away. This is her doing, Gideon said. See, his voice had a quality in it she hadn't heard before, something raw and confused underneath the anger, like a man who genuinely could not connect the dots between his own actions and his current situation. See, you came here because of her. I came here because of a 20-year debt, Elias said. See, and because you are a thief, Mr. Rusk. Those two things exist independent of each other. See, he turned to look at Mara. See, and something shifted in his tone. See, not softer exactly. See, but more deliberate. See, and the deed is not going to me. The yard went quiet. See, even the horses seemed to still. Gideon said, "What?" See, Elias looked back at him. The deed to Iron Creek Ranch is being transferred to Mara Whitlock. See, the silence that followed was the specific silence of a space where multiple people are trying to process the same information, and all of them are doing it at different speeds. See, Mara heard Pete Garrow make a sound that was not quite a word. See, she heard Tommy Reeves shift his weight on the fence railing. See, she heard Gideon's breathing change. "That girl," Gideon said, and his voice was doing something strange, something between a laugh and a statement of disbelief, is 17 years old. See, she has nothing. She has no money. No, she has this land, Elias said. See, which is rather more than nothing. She's a ranch hand. See, she's been clearing water troughs and mending fence for 5 years. She doesn't know the first thing about running a mines. See, Mr. Rusk. Elias's voice didn't rise, but it changed, and whatever it changed into was enough to stop Gideon mid-sentence. See, you had 20 years with this land, and you ran it into the ground. See, I don't think your assessment of what she can or cannot do carries the weight you imagine it does. He turned away from Gideon then, deliberately, in the manner of someone closing a door. See, he looked at the assembled hands. Every man here has a choice to make. See, you can stay and work this ranch honestly for fair wages, under new ownership. See, or you can leave today. No penalty either way. But if you stay under the terms that will be laid out clearly and in writing, and those terms will be different from what you've been used to. See, he looked at Mara. The look meant, this is where you speak. See, she had not prepared anything. There was no version of this morning that she had been able to see clearly enough to prepare for. See, she had walked out of this ranch 4 hours ago with a worn bag and $12 in her boot, and now she was sitting on a borrowed horse in the middle of the yard, looking at men she'd worked alongside for years. See, some of whom had looked away when Calder grabbed her bag and dumped it in the dirt. Some of whom had looked down at their boots when Gideon fired her. See, and all of whom were now looking at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to something approaching cautious hope. See, she swung down from the horse. She was aware of how she looked. See, she was aware of the dust from the trail in her hair and on her dress, and the bruise forming on her arm where Calder had grabbed her. See, she was aware that she was 17 and small, and that some of these men had 20 years on her and had been working land longer than she'd been alive. See, she was aware of all of it, and she did not try to make herself bigger than she was, because she had watched Gideon make himself big her whole life, and she knew that wasn't the kind of big that lasted. See, I don't know how to give speeches, she said, so I'm not going to try. She looked at the men, moving from face to face. See, I know most of you. I know how you work and what you're good at and what corners you cut when nobody's looking. See, because I've been right there alongside you for 5 years, and I don't have a foreman's office to sit in while I pretend not to notice things. A few of them shifted. See, if you stay, you'll get paid properly. On time, not Gideon's way, she paused. See, and I'll work the same hours you work because I don't know how to do it differently. See, Tommy Reeves came down off the fence. I'm staying, he said. See, it was said plainly, no drama in it, just a man making a decision and saying it out loud, and somehow that plain, straightforward answer made things easier. See, Pete Garrow nodded. 2 of the other hands exchanged a look and then nodded too. See, an older man named Holt, who had worked the ranch longer than anyone, and who had never, in Mara's memory, said anything that wasn't directly related to cattle, horses, or weather, cleared his throat. See, wages were 2 months behind, he said. I know, Mara said. See, that'll be sorted. She looked at Elias. She didn't know if it would be sorted. See, she didn't know how any of the finances worked, or what state the ranch accounts were in, or what Gideon had managed to drain before the foreclosure was finalized. See, she looked at Elias because she needed him to know she was asking a real question with that look, not performing confidence she didn't have. See, he gave her a slight nod, the nod of a man who had thought about this and had an answer. See, she looked back at Holt. It'll be sorted, she said again. See, Gideon had been standing on the porch through all of this. See, he had not moved, had not spoken, and she had been carefully not looking at him directly because she didn't want to manage his reaction right now, didn't want to have to navigate his anger on top of everything else. See, but the silence had a quality to it that made her finally turn her head and look at him. See, he was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. See, it wasn't pure anger, though there was anger in it. See, it wasn't quite humiliation, though there was that too. See, it was something more complicated than either, something that looked almost like a man trying to figure out where he went wrong and not being able to find the single moment to blame. See, which is the worst kind of reckoning because it means the wrong is everywhere and there is no one clean cut to point at. See, Gideon, she said. He looked at her. Take what's yours, she said. See, your clothes, your personal things. Leave everything else. She held his gaze. See, I'm not going to talk about what happened here. Not to people in town, not to anyone. See, that's over. She paused. But I need you to be off this property in 2 hours. See, he looked at her for a long time. She could not tell what he was thinking, and she was not sure she wanted to know. See, then he looked at the travel bag through the open door, and he went inside without another word, and she heard his boots on the floorboards moving toward the back of the house. See, she let out a breath that she had apparently been holding since she came through that gate. See, Elias moved up beside her. That was well done, he said quietly. See, I don't feel like it was well done, she said. That's generally how you can tell, he said. See, she almost made that almost law sound again, and this time it actually got out, small and short and a little rough around the edges, but real. See, one of his riders raised an eyebrow. She didn't explain it. See, the next 2 hours were not orderly. See, there was no version of them that was going to be orderly because the situation was not orderly. It was a ranch in the middle of a drought with deferred maintenance and unpaid wages, and a cattle herd that had been poorly managed for a season and half. All of it now belonging to a 17-year-old girl who had arrived that morning on a borrowed horse carrying everything she owned in a torn bag. See, Elias's men helped where they could. See, 2 of them, who apparently had actual ranch experience, began a rapid assessment of the livestock walking the pastures, counting, checking condition, while Elias himself sat at the kitchen table with Mara and went through the ranch's account books, which told a story that was about as ugly as she'd expected, but slightly less catastrophic than the worst version she'd been imagining. The cattle numbers were down from the drought, significantly, but not unfixably. There were outstanding debts to 3 suppliers in Red Hollow, but none of them were the kind of debt that would follow the new ownership. Elias's lawyer had been clear about that. And Elias walked her through it at the table with the patience of a man who understood that transferring land was only part of what needed to transfer. She needed to understand the shape of what she'd taken on. She sat across from him with the account book open between them, and she asked questions. And some of the questions were the kind that embarrassed her slightly because they revealed how little she knew. And she asked them anyway, because the embarrassment of not knowing was a shorter-term problem than the consequence of pretending to know. The wells, she said. Gideon dug the 3rd well 2 years ago. I don't know what that cost or whether he borrowed for it. The well is in the asset records, Elias said. The cost was his own capital. It's yours now. The east fence needs about a 1/4 mile of new posts. I've been telling Calder for 6 months. That's a conversation for you and your hands to prioritize, he said. I'm going to be in Red Hollow for the next week, settling other business. My attorney, Mr. Forsyth, will remain here for 2 days to help you complete the paperwork. He paused. After that, you'll need to manage on your own. She looked at him. After 2 days, yes. I've been here one morning. You have, he said. And you've already addressed your workforce, your former employer, and the 2 most urgent financial questions without losing your composure once. He met her eyes. I'm not abandoning you to this. I'll be available in Red Hollow and you can send word any time. But I can't manage this for you, Mara. And you wouldn't want me to. She thought about whether that was true. There was a version of her, the version that had gotten up that morning in the barn with $12 in her boot and nowhere to go, that might have wanted exactly that, someone to come in and manage things. To take the weight of it, to be the person who made the decisions. That version was understandable, but she also knew that version was a trap. She'd watched what happened when someone else held the decisions, 5 years of watching it, right here on this land. She'd watched what Gideon's version of management cost the people around him and the land itself, and she did not want to replicate that structure, even in a benevolent form. You're right, she said. I wouldn't. Gideon left at 20 minutes before the 2 hours were up. He came out of the main house with 2 bags, considerably smaller than the one she'd seen through the open door, which told her Elias's men had been clear with him about what he could and couldn't take. Pete Garrow had Gideon's personal horse ready at the gate, the gray mare that had been his and only his for as long as Mara had been on the ranch, that nobody else rode. And she'd made sure to tell Pete that the mare went with him, because that was right, and she was going to do things that were right even when the person they were right for had done nothing to deserve it. Gideon stopped at the gate and looked back at the main house. She was standing on the porch. She hadn't planned to be. She'd come out for something else and found herself on the porch at the moment he turned, and for a moment they were looking at each other across the width of the yard, and it was a long look, complicated and quiet. The look of 2 people with a great deal of history between them that was never going to be simple. He turned away first. He put his foot in the stirrup and swung up onto the gray mare with the automatic ease of a man who'd done it 10,000 times, and he rode out through the gate without looking back again. Mara stayed on the porch until he was out of sight. She was aware that she was supposed to feel something significant in that moment. Triumph, maybe, or relief, or the particular satisfaction of a situation resolved in your favor. She was aware that this was the kind of moment that warranted a significant feeling. What she actually felt was tired, and slightly unreal, and hungry. Because she had not eaten since a small supper the previous evening, and it was now past midday, and her body was sending her plain basic information that had nothing to do with the significance of the moment. See, she went inside and found bread and some dried meat in the kitchen and ate standing at the counter. See, and Elias appeared in the kitchen doorway about 3 minutes into this and looked at her and then looked at the bread and said nothing at all, which she appreciated. See, sit down, she said. Your ribs are worse than you're letting on. See, they're manageable. They're not, she said. I've been watching how you breathe since we left the trail. See, every time you turn left, you hold it for half a second. She pushed the bread toward him. See, sit down and eat something. You've been on a horse for 3 hours with broken ribs and a splinted arm because you decided that getting to me before Calder did was more important than staying horizontal. See, he sat down. She found more bread and some cold chicken from the previous evening sun put it in front of him, and he ate without performing gratitude about it, which was the right thing to do. See, and they ate together at Gideon Rusk's kitchen table in silence for several minutes. See, my father would have liked you, Elias said finally. See, she looked up. He had a very low tolerance for pretense, he said. See, and a high regard for people who did what needed doing without making a production of it. He looked at the food on the plate in front of him. See, he died wishing he'd found your grandfather. He spent a long time looking. See, I know my grandfather would have told him to stop looking, she said. See, he would have been embarrassed by the attention. See, probably, Elias said. He sounds like a man who did things because they needed doing and not because of what came after. See, yes, she said. That's him exactly. They were quiet for a moment. See, the pipe is in my bag, she said. I want to put it somewhere safe. See, it belongs to you, he said. It belonged to him, she said. See, I'm just keeping it. The afternoon moved through slowly and with the particular quality of days that contain too much, where time seems to both rush and drag, where hours pass, and you look up and cannot quite account for where they went. See, Elias's attorney, a spare, precise man named Forsyth, who wore his coat, buttoned it to the top regardless of the heat, and carried a leather case that appeared to contain approximately 1,000 documents. See, arrived from Red Hollow at 2 o'clock and spent the next 3 hours going through paperwork with Mara at the kitchen table. See, she signed her name more times that afternoon than she had signed it in her entire previous life combined. See, each signature felt strange. Not bad strange, just stranger than she'd expected, the particular strangeness of a thing that represents more than the physical act of it. See, she wrote Mara Whitlock in her careful hand, and each time the pen lifted from the paper, she was someone slightly different than she'd been before it touched down. See, Forsyth explained each document before she signed it, which she'd been clear about before they started. She was not going to sign anything she hadn't had explained, and she didn't care how long that took. See, he seemed, if not pleased by this, at least professionally respectful of it. See, he explained clearly and completely, and answered her questions without the particular kind of patience that is actually condescension with better manners. See, she appreciated that. The last document was the deed itself. See, Forsyth set it in front of her and pointed to the line, and she looked at it for a moment before she picked up the pen. See, the full legal description of Iron Creek Ranch, the acreage numbers, the county notations, the long formal language of property law that reduced a piece of land, and everything that had happened on it to a series of boundaries and coordinates. See, she thought about her grandfather, about the nights he'd sat outside the bunkhouse with his pipe, looking at the stars, never complaining, never explaining, just existing in his particular self-contained way. See, she thought about all the work she'd done on this land and never owned any of it. See, she thought about all the people who had been on this land before Gideon and would be on it after everyone in this room was gone. See, she signed her name. See, Forsyth collected the document. See, replaced it in his leather case. See, closed the case. See, and stood. See, the filing will be completed in Red Hollow by tomorrow morning, he said. See, after that, the property is yours without question. See, thank you, she said. He nodded once precisely and went to find Elias. See, Mara sat alone at the kitchen table with the pen still in her hand. See, outside she could hear the sounds of the ranch. The hands going about the late afternoon work, the cattle in the distance, the wind through the dry brush along the fence line. See, the same sounds she had been hearing for 5 years. See, the same sounds, completely different. She put the pen down. See, she got up from the table and walked through the house that was now hers, through rooms she had only ever been in as someone performing service, carrying something or cleaning something or delivering something. See, she walked through them slowly now, looking at them differently, not with the eye of someone who owned them. She wasn't sure yet how to look at things with that eye, but with the eye of someone who was allowed to look. See, who had the right to stand in the middle of a room and just look at it without it being anyone else's business. See, the rooms were plain. They were not particularly clean because Gideon had not been a man who prioritized cleanliness for its own sake, and there had been no one to maintain the house in recent months with any real attention. See, the rugs were worn, and the windows needed washing, and there were water stains on the ceiling in the second bedroom that suggested a roof repair that had been delayed too long. See, she cataloged all of it without distress. These were problems with solutions. See, she was acquainted with problems that had solutions. See, what had always been harder were the problems that didn't. See, she stopped in the doorway of what had been Gideon's bedroom. See, he had taken his personal things, but the room still had the shape of him in it, in the way the furniture was arranged, in the particular worn spot on the floor beside the bed where he had stood every morning. See, in the hook on the wall where his other coat had hung and was no longer hanging. See, she looked at it for a moment. Then she went to find Tommy Reeves, because the east fence needed a 1/4 mile of new posts, and it was not going to wait for her to finish having feelings about rooms. See, Tommy was in the equipment shed checking the post driver when she found him. See, he looked up and then immediately looked like he wasn't sure what posture to have around her now. See, which was a problem she was going to have to figure out with each of the hands individually, and over time the adjustment from having worked beside someone to having that someone hold your employment. See, was not a small one, and she was not naive about it. See, east fence, she said. What do you need to start on it tomorrow? See, he blinked. Tomorrow? The posts have been waiting since April, she said. See, I've been watching that section pull loose for 6 months. See, if we get any wind with weather in it when the rain finally comes, we'll lose a 1/4 of the east herd through that gap. She looked at him. See, what do you need? He straightened up slowly. Something in his expression settled. See, 40 posts, minimum, he said. More like 50 to be safe. See, wire. The driver needs a new bolt on the guide arm, but I've got the part, I just didn't. Calder said it wasn't priority. See, Calder's in Red Hollow being charged with assault, she said. See, what do you need to get that bolt fixed today? He thought about it. See, about an hour, he said. Then get started, she said. See, I'll see about the posts. He went. She stood in the equipment shed doorway and looked out at the ranch, at the yard, the fence lines, the dry pastures, the cattle in the distance. See, the land she had worked without owning, the land that was hers now, with all its problems and its drought and its 2 months of back wages and its 1/4 mile of failing fence. See, she did not feel like someone who had been rescued. See, she felt like someone who had an enormous amount of work to do and had just gotten the right to do it in her own name. See, those were not the same thing, and the difference mattered more than she had the words for yet. See, Elias found her there as the afternoon light started changing. See, Forsyth is heading back to Red Hollow, he said. See, I know. I said goodbye. He stood beside her in the shed doorway, and they both looked out at the ranch for a moment. See, I'll leave in the morning, he said. My men will take the horses they brought, and the rest of the equipment is yours. See, I've left Forsyth's contact information on the kitchen table and the notes from this afternoon's accounts review. See, she nodded. The first 60 days will be the hardest, he said. See, after that the shape of it will be clearer. I know, she said. See, you don't fully, he said. See, not unkind. See, but you will. See, she looked at him sideways. Is this where you tell me I can do it? See, no, he said, you don't need me to tell you that. He paused. See, I was going to tell you that the Red Hollow bank manager, a man named Cruz, is someone I trust. See, If you need to talk through the financial picture with someone local, he's straight. See, all right, she said. Cruise. Cruise, he confirmed. See, they stood there another moment. The light was going gold and long, the way it got in the late afternoon when the drought dust hung in the air and turned everything amber, and the ranch spread out in front of them, worn and dry and difficult and real. See, my grandfather saved your father, Mara said. And you came out here and you gave me this. She paused. See, I've been trying to figure out how to feel about that all day. See, have you landed anywhere, he said. I landed at Grateful, she said. See, which I'm not sure I'm comfortable with, but it seems to be where I am. See, Grateful is fine, he said. It doesn't mean you owe me anything. See, I know it doesn't. She looked out at the fence line, at the failing posts in the east section she couldn't see from here, but could see in her mind. See, I'm going to make this place something worth being grateful for. See, he was quiet for a moment. I know, he said, and he said it simply, without flourish, the way someone says something when they mean it specifically and don't need anything around it to make the meaning bigger. See, the evening came in around them, the first stars appearing above the dry valley, and Iron Creek Ranch settled into the end of its first day under its new owner. See, imperfect and hard used, and full of problems that were going to require more than one person to solve. See, Mara stood in the doorway of the equipment shed and felt the weight of it, the full real weight of what she had taken on, and she did not tell herself it would be easy. See, because she was her grandfather's granddaughter, and he had not raised her to confuse what was right with what was easy. See, she stood there until the last of the light went. Then she went inside to figure out what needed doing in the morning. See, Elias left at first light. She heard his horse in the yard before she was fully awake, heard the low voices of his men, the creak of leather, and the particular sound of a group preparing to ride out. See, she lay in the bed that had been Gideon's bed. She had not been able to bring herself to sleep in it and had taken the smaller room at the end of the hall instead. See, the room that had no particular history attached to it, and she listened to the sounds of departure and did not go out to watch it happen. See, she had said what needed to be said the night before. See, she did not think either of them needed a formal goodbye at dawn. See, she heard the hoofbeats move across the yard and through the gate and fade out toward the Red Hollow Road, and then there was just the ordinary morning sound of the ranch waking up the cattle in the distance. See, Pete Garrow moving around in the yard below, the creak of the equipment shed door. See, she got up. She made the bed with the same habit that had governed every morning for 5 years, tight corners, no wasted motion, because that was what her grandfather had taught her, and she had never stopped. See, she splashed water on her face from the basin. She looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall and saw someone she was not entirely used to seeing, not older exactly, but different in a way that had happened too fast to fully track. See, same face, same eyes, something behind them shifted. See, she went downstairs and built up the fire in the kitchen stove and put water on for coffee and stood at the window looking out at the yard while she waited for it. See, the first problem presented itself before the coffee was ready. See, Holt appeared at the kitchen door, hat in hand, which meant he had something serious to say and was aware it was serious. See, she let him in and poured him a cup when the water was ready and sat across from him at the table and waited. See, 2 of the wells are lower than the count shows, he said. See, he was holding his cup in both hands the way old men do. See, the 3rd well, the deep one Rusk put in 2 years ago, it's been drawing slower than it should. See, Calder was keeping 2 sets of notes on the water levels. See, the set he showed Rusk and the set that was real. See, she looked at him. How much lower, he told her. See, she drank her coffee and said nothing for a moment and let the number sit there and what it meant for the cattle rotation in them and the thought about what it meant for the cattle the trough schedule and the timeline she had been working out in her head since the previous. See, evening for how to manage through the rest of the drought. See, Calder was hiding it, she said. Calder was hiding everything that would have made Rusk have to make a real decision, Holt said. See, it's easier to show the boss numbers that didn't require anything difficult. He paused. See, you'll want to see the real ledger. I know where it is. See, Calder kept it in the floor of the tack room under a loose board. See, she looked at him. You knew it was there. I suspected it, he said. See, I didn't look. He met her eyes with the steadiness of a man who was not going to dress that up. See, I had a family to feed, and Rusk paid, even if he paid late. See, I made a choice, and it was not the right one, and I am telling you now, because that's the only way I know to start fixing it. See, she held his gaze for a long moment. She thought about the hands who had looked away when Calder dumped her bag in the dirt. See, she thought about the years of looking away that happened on this ranch, the small accumulated silences that had let Gideon and Calder do what they did for as long as they did it. See, she thought about how easy it was to say you would have been different, and how much harder it was to actually be different, and how Holt was sitting here at her table at 6 a.m. telling her a true thing he could have kept to himself. See, go get the ledger, she said, and then let's figure out what we're actually working with. See, he got up and went. She poured herself more coffee and sat with it and thought. See, the real ledger was worse than the official numbers and better than her worst imagining, which was more or less what she'd expected. See, the water situation was serious, but not catastrophic. Calder's 2-count system had been designed to hide a gradual decline rather than a crisis, which meant the crisis point was coming but had not arrived. See, there was time to act if she acted now. She spent the rest of that morning with Holt going over both sets of numbers at the kitchen table. See, and by midday she had a rotation plan for the cattle that would reduce water draw from the struggling well and redistribute the herd across 3 different grazing areas to reduce pressure on the driest sections. See, it was not a perfect plan. It was the plan that was possible with what she had, and there was a difference between those two things that she was learning to make peace with in real time. See, Tommy Reeves and another hand named Curtis got the fence repair started on the east section, and she could hear the driver working from the kitchen window while she sat with Holt and the ledgers. See, a sound that felt productive in a way that settled something in her chest she hadn't realized needed settling. See, the back wages were the problem she had no immediate solution for. See, 2 months. Every man on the ranch was 2 months behind. See, and she had gone over the remaining accounts carefully enough to know that the operating funds Elias had left accessible through Forsyth's arrangements were enough to run the ranch forward, but not enough to cover the backlog and stay solvent. See, she needed to do one or the other, and she could not do both. See, she was sitting with this problem at the kitchen table when Pete Garrow came to the door at 2:30 in the afternoon and said there was a man out front who said he had business with the new owner. See, she stood up. The man on the porch was short and thin and wearing a town suit that was a size too large for him. See, he had a briefcase and a nervous energy that expressed itself in the way he kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other, and he introduced himself as Leonard Pruitt. See, representing 3 supply merchants in Red Hollow to whom Iron Creek Ranch owed outstanding debts. See, she brought him inside. She sat him down at the kitchen table. See, she offered him coffee, which he accepted with the anxious gratitude of someone who hadn't expected courtesy and didn't know what to do with it. See, then she put both sets of ledgers on the table in front of him, Calder's false numbers and Holt's real ones, and she said, "Before you tell me what you're owed, I want you to see what the previous management was hiding. See, because I think it's relevant to the conversation we're about to have." See, he looked at the ledgers. He looked at them for a long time. See, the merchants didn't know, he said finally. "I know they didn't," she said. See, neither did I, but I do now, and I want to be straight with you about what I can do. She looked at him directly. See, I can pay a portion of what's owed now and the remainder on a schedule over the next 4 months. See, I can put that in writing. If the drought breaks and the cattle numbers recover the way I expect them to, there's a reasonable chance I can accelerate that schedule. She paused. See, what I can't do is settle the full amount today and still pay the men who work here, because if I don't pay them, I won't have men working here. And if I don't have men working here, this ranch fails and nobody gets anything. See, Pruitt looked at the ledgers again. Then he looked at her. See, "How old are you?" he said. He said it without condescension, with what seemed like genuine and slightly overwhelmed curiosity. See, 17, she said. He was quiet for a moment. My oldest daughter is 19, he said. See, he closed the briefcase. Let me take the ledgers back to Red Hollow and show the merchants what was actually being kept. See, I think there may be more flexibility in the conversation than I came here prepared to offer. See, she let him take copies. She did not let him take the originals, which she kept because she'd learned already that originals mattered. See, he left with a different posture than he'd arrived with. See, she watched him go from the porch and thought one problem at a time. See, not all of them solved, one of them moving. That was enough for today. See, the next problem arrived the following morning in the form of a rider from town, a young boy of maybe 12, who handed her a folded note and waited with his horse while she read it. See, the note was from someone named Edwin Marsh, who described himself as a neighboring ranch owner and who wished to meet with her at her earliest convenience regarding what he called a matter of mutual interest and urgency. See, she asked the boy if he knew what Marsh wanted. The boy shrugged with the magnificent indifference of someone who had been handed a thing to deliver and had not been paid to think about its contents. See, she told him to tell Marsh she'd meet him day after tomorrow at the Iron Creek main gate at 8 in the morning. See, the boy rode off. She folded the note and went back to the cattle rotation schedule. See, Holt told her that evening who Edwin Marsh was. He's been trying to buy out this corner of the valley for 3 years, Holt said. See, they were eating supper at the big kitchen table, all the hands together, which was not something that had happened under Gideon. Under Gideon, the hands ate at the bunkhouse table, and the house table was Gideon's. See, Mara had not made a production of changing this. She had simply said supper was at the house tonight and waited to see who came, and all of them had come. See, he made Rusk an offer twice. Rusk wouldn't sell because the price wasn't right, and also because Rusk was the kind of man who'd rather go under than admit he needed to sell. See, what does Marsh want with this section specifically? She said. Seawater, Holt said. His property is dry further north. See, our wells and our creek section are what keep this corner of the valley viable for cattle. See, he's wanted this water access for years. She ate her supper and thought about that. See, he's going to try to buy me out, she said. He's going to try to buy you out, Holt agreed. See, and he's going to come at you with the assumption that a 17-year-old girl in over her head will be more motivated to sell than Rusk was. See, that assumption is incorrect, she said. I know it is, Holt said. See, just thought you should know the shape of the conversation before you're in it. See, she looked at him across the table. This man who had known the wrong ledger was there and had not said so for reasons that were human and understandable and still wrong. See, this man who was now sitting at her table telling her things she needed to know before she needed to know them. See, thank you, Holt, she said. He picked up his fork. See, don't thank me, he said. I'm just doing what I should have been doing all along. See, the days that followed had a texture to them that was nothing like she'd expected and nothing like anything she'd experienced before. See, she had known hard work. She had been doing hard work since she was 12 years old, and she did not mistake this for anything other than what it was. See, but the work of ownership was different from the work of a hand in ways she was still learning to map. See, it was not more physical. Sometimes it was less physical. See, it was the kind of work that lived in the head, in the constant background calculation of what was needed against what was available, in the decisions that had downstream consequences she couldn't always see at the moment she was making them. See, in the management of people, not ordering them around, but actually managing them, understanding what each person was good at, and where they got stuck, and what kind of direction they needed, and what kind they resented. See, Tommy Reeves, she learned fast, needed to know the reason for things. See, he worked with more commitment and less resentment when she explained why she was asking for something than when she just asked for it. See, he was not difficult or contrary. He just wanted to understand the logic. See, that was a manageable thing once she understood it. See, Pete Garrow was the opposite. He wanted clear instructions and minimal explanation. See, he trusted her judgment fine. But too much talking about the reasoning behind a decision made him uncomfortable, made him feel like she was uncertain, and he worked better when she was decisive, even when she wasn't entirely sure. See, Curtis was 22 and the least experienced hand on the property, and he made mistakes regularly, which was normal. See, and what she learned about Curtis was that how she responded to his mistakes determined whether he came to her with the next problem or hid it. See, she made a point of being even with him, even when the mistake was costly, because a hidden problem on a ranch in drought conditions was always more expensive than a visible one. See, Holt she treated like the counsel he was becoming, because he knew this land better than anyone else on it, and his knowledge was not something she could develop on her own timeline. It had to be accessed now, while he had it to give. See, this was not management strategy. She hadn't read about it anywhere or been taught it. See, it was the practical accumulation of watching people carefully over 5 years and understanding that the difference between someone who got things done and someone who didn't was usually not ability, but whether the people, see, around them felt like they mattered to the outcome. See, Gideon had never understood that. Calder had understood it and used it wrong, as a mechanism of pressure rather than investment. See, she was figuring out what the right use looked like. See, Edwin Marsh arrived at the main gate 2 days after his note, precisely at 8 in the morning, which told her he was a man who respected punctuality as a form of power. See, he was perhaps 60, broad through the shoulders, with the weathered face of someone who had spent most of his life outdoors, and the clothing of someone who had enough money to not need to anymore. See, he had 2 men with him. He left them at the gate and came forward alone, which she read as a deliberate look. I'm reasonable. I'm not here with force. We're just neighbors having a conversation. See, she met him at the gate without Pete or Holt for the same reason. See, she understood the language he was speaking. Miss Whitlock, he said. See, he did not say it dismissively. He said it with the particular politeness of a man who has decided that politeness is the most effective tool available to him at this moment. See, Mr. Marsh, she said, come in. See, she brought him to the kitchen table, because the kitchen table was where she did business, and she was already deciding that this was her way of doing things. No formal parlor, no performance of the kind of establishment she didn't yet have. See, just the table and the coffee and the clear northern light through the windows. See, he took the coffee. He looked around the kitchen with the assessing eye of a man who had thought about owning this room. See, I'll be direct, he said. I've been trying to acquire this property for 3 years. See, I know, she said. He looked at her. Holt, he said. See, not accusingly, just acknowledging the source. Holt, she confirmed. See, then you know why I want it, he said. The water access, she said. See, the water access, he said. My northern section loses cattle every drought year. See, if I had rights to your wells and your creek section, that loss stops. See, the economics are straightforward. He set down his coffee cup. See, I want to make you an offer for the property, a fair one. See, significantly above market given the current drought conditions, which I know depress the apparent value, but which I also know are temporary. He named a number. See, it was a real number. She had spent enough time with Forsyth's paperwork and Elias's account notes to know it was above market, not wildly, but meaningfully. See, it was enough to mean something. She looked at the number in the air between them and thought about what it would mean to take it. See, no more back wages problem, no more water schedule. See, no more wondering whether the east fence would hold or whether the third well would drop below viable draw before the rain came. See, she could take that number and walk into Red Hollow and start something smaller and simpler and entirely her own without the weight of this particular history on it. See, she thought about all of that. Then she thought about her grandfather sitting on the bunkhouse step in the evenings with his pipe. See, she thought about what it meant to have a place you belonged to. See, she thought about the moment Elias had handed her the deed and the specific feeling of signing her name to something that was bigger than her. See, she thought about the fact that she had been given this land, not because someone had rescued her, but because 2 acts of integrity, one in a mountain pass 20 years ago. See, One in a barn 2 weeks ago had created a chain of consequence that ended here, at this table, with her name on the deed. See, selling it would not undo what her grandfather had done. See, she knew that. But it would mean that what she'd been given had been used as a resting place, a brief thing, a way station rather than a destination. See, and she did not think that was what it was supposed to be. See, no, she said. Marsh was quiet. No, she said. See, thank you for the offer. It's a real offer, and I mean that. See, but I'm not selling. He looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating. See, she watched him do it, watched him decide whether to push, watched him look at her face and make some assessment about whether pushing would accomplish anything. See, the drought may not break this year, he said. If it doesn't, the financial pressure on a small operation like this, without significant reserves. See, I'm aware of the financial pressure, she said. The water levels in your third well. See, I'm aware of the water levels, she said. She kept her voice even. See, Mr. Marsh, I appreciate that you know this land and its challenges better than most. See, but I want to be clear with you, the fact that this is difficult does not make it not mine. See, difficult things I own are still mine. Another silence. See, he picked up his coffee and finished it. He set the cup down. See, he looked at the table between them for a moment, and then he looked up, and there was something different in his expression, something she hadn't seen when he came in. See, not warmth exactly. Respect is too large a word for what it was. See, but a shifting in how he was seeing her. Your grandfather, he said. See, Everett Whitlock. He worked this section for years before Rusk bought it from the previous owner. See, I knew him some, not well. He was not a man who knew well easily. He paused. See, he broke 3 of my fence posts once because my fence line was 6 inches onto land that wasn't mine, and he measured it himself and told me to my face and fixed the posts before he left. A pause. See, I always liked that about him. She had not known her grandfather had worked this land before Gideon owned it. See, she sat with that for a moment. Let it land. He never mentioned it, she said. See, he wouldn't have, Marsh said. He stood up. He picked up his hat from the table. See, if you change your mind, the offer stands. He looked at her. See, but I don't think you're going to change your mind. See, I'm not, she said. He nodded once. Good luck to you then. He said it without sarcasm, and she believed him. See, she walked him back to the gate. He mounted his horse, and his 2 men fell in beside him, and they rode north toward his land, and she stood at the gate and watched them go. See, her grandfather had stood on this land before her. See, she had not known that. She had not known it, and it changed something in the texture of what she was holding, not the weight of it, but the quality. See, as if the ground beneath her feet had roots she hadn't known were there, running deeper than the history she could see. See, she went back to work. The days accumulated. See, she stopped counting them and started measuring time by what got done instead. The east fence finished and the cattle rotation adjusted. The water draw from the failing, well reduced enough to stabilize the level. See, Pruitt came back from Red Hollow with a revised payment schedule that 2 of the 3 merchants had agreed to, and the third, a grain supplier named Alcott, came out to the ranch himself to negotiate. See, Alcott was a harder conversation. He was not a bad man, but he was a man under his own financial pressure. See, and he sat across from her at the kitchen table and told her plainly that a further delay on his debt would put him in difficulty with his own accounts, and he needed something more concrete than what Pruitt had arranged. See, she asked him how much specifically. He told her. See, she thought about it for 10 minutes while he drank his coffee, and then she proposed a trade hay from the south pasture, which was dry but still viable, a quantity sufficient to offset the debt amount at current market rates. See, she had more hay than she had cash, and he had a need she could meet without touching the operating funds. See, he thought about it. He did not think about it long. See, delivered, he said. Delivered, she said. They shook hands on it. See, he drove his wagon back to Red Hollow that afternoon with 3 of her hands loading the bales, and she watched it go and thought, one more problem moving. See, not solved, but moving. It was Holt who came to her 3 weeks after she'd taken ownership and said the word she had been waiting for and afraid of in equal measure. See, we need to talk about the herd, he said. He said it in the morning, before the other hands were up, which was his way of telling her. The conversation was serious enough that he didn't want it to have an audience. See, she made coffee and sat down. The herd had been declining through the drought. She knew that. See, she knew the numbers. She had been tracking the numbers with the same attention she used to track water levels when that had been her job. See, and she knew the downward curve even if she hadn't said it aloud to anyone yet, because saying it aloud meant making decisions she wasn't sure she was ready to make. See, how many are we going to lose? She said. Holt looked at his hands around his cup. See, if the drought holds another month at this level, maybe 15% of the current herd. See, if it breaks in the next 2 weeks, probably half that. See, and if it gets worse? She said. If we get another dry month on top of this one, he said, we're looking at decisions about the breeding stock. See, she understood what that meant. Losing breeding stock was not a setback you recovered from in one season. See, it was the kind of loss that reshaped what a ranch was capable of for years. See, what are our options? She said. He laid them out. See, she listened without interrupting, which was the thing she had found hardest to learn, not the work, not the decisions, but the listening. See, her instinct was to process quickly and respond, because quick processing had been a survival mechanism for years. See, slowing it down, sitting with what someone was telling her until they were finished, telling her all of it, was a discipline she was still building. See, he laid out 3 options. Emergency water purchase from Marsh. He had the capacity and would charge for it, but it was available. See, reduce the herd size now by selling a portion at low drought prices to remove the water demand. See, or hold, manage the rotation as tightly as possible and wait for the weather. See, none of the 3 options was good. The first was expensive. See, the second meant selling at the worst possible time. See, the third was a gamble. What would you do? She said. See, Holt looked up. He was not used to being asked this, and she could see that, could see the slight adjustment in him when the question landed. See, hold, he said, but reduce the water draw in the west section, move that group east where there's still some green, and check the creek level every day. See, first sign it's dropping faster than a 1/4 inch a week. Go to Marsh about the water purchase before you need it bad enough to accept whatever terms he names. See, she nodded slowly. All right, she said. That's what you'd do too, he said. See, yes, she said, but I wanted to hear you say it. See, he looked at her sideways. Why? Because I've been making decisions alone for 3 weeks, and I'm not sure which ones I'm getting wrong, she said. See, she said it plainly, without performing humility, just stating a fact. See, when you've made enough decisions by yourself, you start to lose the edges of them. See, someone else seeing the same thing from the outside helps. See, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you're not making the wrong decisions. See, which ones am I making right? She said. He thought about it seriously. See, she appreciated that he thought about it seriously. See, the hands, he said, you're reading them right. Tommy's better than he was under Calder. See, Curtis doesn't hide things anymore. Pete's just Pete, but he's working without resentment, which under Rusk he didn't. He paused. See, people work different when they think what they do matters to someone who's paying attention. See, my grandfather said something like that once, she said. See, he said the difference between a soldier who follows orders and a soldier who wins a fight is whether he thinks anyone's counting on him to be smart and not just obedient. See, Holt said nothing for a moment. He was a good man, he said quietly. See, he was not a simple man, she said, which I think is different from good and also harder. See, she thought about that distinction through the rest of the morning. See, not simple, not easy to be around in the way that made other people comfortable, not the kind of man who smoothed things over or performed contentment he didn't feel. See, her grandfather had been difficult in certain ways. See, demanding of himself past the point of reasonableness. See, quiet when people wanted speech. She had not always found him easy. See, but he had stayed in a mountain pass for 3 days in the cold for men he didn't know, and he had never mentioned it to another person for the rest of his life. See, and she thought that particular combination of difficult and right was the truest thing she knew about him. See, she thought maybe it was the truest thing she knew about herself too, if she was honest about it. See, she thought about it late that night, sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp low and the account book open in front of her. The pipe on the corner of the table where she'd placed it the day she arrived, not hidden away, just there, just present. See, the way something is when you want to keep the fact of it close. See, she reached over and picked it up, turned it in her hands. See, the worn bowl, the smooth stem, the weight that was almost nothing. See, he had given this to a stranger in a mountain pass. See, she had given water and a splint and a night's vigil to a stranger in a barn. See, she had not thought of those two things together before now. See, she had thought of each separately, had understood the connection Elias made between them. See, but she had not until this moment felt the actual line between what her grandfather had done and what she had done, not a metaphorical line, but something more literal. See, a thing that ran from a frozen mountain pass to a drought-dry barn in a valley neither man had ever seen, connected by the particular kind of person that Everett Whitlock had been and that Mara Whitlock was still figuring out she was. See, she set the pipe down carefully. Outside, the wind moved through the valley. See, it had been doing that all evening, a wind that had a different quality to it than the dry, static air of the drought weeks, something in it that felt loaded, that felt like weather thinking about becoming something. See, she went to the back door and opened it and stood in the dark, listening to the wind. See, she had grown up here in the sense that mattered, not born here, but formed here, shaped by the work and the land and the particular hardness of a drought valley. See, she knew what the wind sounded like when it was bringing nothing, when it would sounded like, and she knew what it sounded like when it was carrying something in from the north. See, she stood there for a long time. See, then she went back inside. See, closed the account book. See, blew out the lamp. See, and went upstairs to sleep. See, she woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of rain on the roof. See, not heavy, not the kind of rain that announces itself. See, the kind that starts quietly and doesn't bother to ask permission. The kind that has been building somewhere far off for weeks and has finally found its way to where it was needed and simply starts. See, she lay still in the dark and listened to it. She heard Pete Garrow's voice in the yard below, a kind of shout that was not alarmed but relieved, and then Tommy's voice, and then the sound of the other hands coming out of the bunkhouse. See, all of them awake despite the hour, because this sound was the sound they had been waiting for through 11 months of drought, and it was not a sound you slept through. See, she got up. She pulled on her boots and her coat and went downstairs and out the back door and stood on the ground of Iron Creek Ranch in the dark while the rain came down, thin still but real, unmistakably real. See, hitting the hard dry earth and running off it at first because the ground was too compacted to absorb it fast, and then gradually, as the minutes passed, beginning to soak in. See, she could hear the creek. She hadn't been able to hear the creek from the house in months. See, it had been too low, too thin to make the sound it was supposed to make. See, but she could hear it now, something moving in the sound of it that hadn't been there yesterday. See, she stood in the rain and she did not cry because she was not built for that kind of display. But she closed her eyes and she held her face up to it and she let herself feel, for just that moment, all of it the exhaustion of the weeks. See, the weight of the decisions, the loneliness of learning everything at once without a person to learn it from, the grief of her grandfather that she had been carrying under all the work like a stone in her pocket. See, the strange and enormous thing of having a piece of land that was hers, actually hers, her name on the deed, her responsibility, her future in the most literal possible sense. See, she let herself feel all of it. See, and then the moment passed, and she opened her eyes, and the rain was still coming, and the hands were in the yard, and somewhere in the dark, the cattle were making sounds she recognized as sounds animals make when they feel water. See, falling on land that has been too long without it. See, she had work to do in the morning. There was the creek level to check at first light. See, there was the water table in the third well to monitor over the next 48 hours to see how the rain affected the draw rate. See, there was the east pasture, newly fenced, and the cattle rotation to adjust, now that the rain had changed the calculation. And Pruitt was coming back at the end of the week, and she needed to be ready for that conversation. See, she had work to do. She stood in the rain a little while longer anyway. See, the rain lasted 4 days. Not continuous, not the kind of rain that becomes its own problem, but steady enough and patient enough to do what 11 months of dry sky had undone. See, it came and went in intervals, heavy for a few hours, then lighter, then a pause, then back again, as if it understood that ground this compacted needed time between each pass to actually accept what was being given to it. See, Mara tracked the creek level every morning at first light, standing at the bank in her boots, while the water rose not fast, never fast, but visibly, measurably. See, a 1/4 inch the first morning, and 1/2 an inch the second, and by the 4th morning the creek was running at a depth she hadn't seen since before the drought started, brown and churned from the runoff, but moving, genuinely moving. See, with the particular energy of water that has somewhere to go. See, the 3rd well showed the change by the 2nd day. See, she and Holt checked it together in the early afternoon, Holt with the measuring rod, Mara writing the numbers in the real ledger, the one they'd pulled from under the tack room floor. See, because she had decided the real ledger was going to be the only ledger from now on, and whatever the numbers said, they were going to say it plainly. See, the level was up 4 inches from its low point. Holt looked at the number she'd written. See, he looked at it for a long time. "We're going to be all right," he said. See, he said it quietly, the way people say things they've been afraid to say, because saying them too soon felt like tempting something. See, with this water and the cattle where they are, we're going to be all right this season. See, she wrote the date beside the number. She capped the pen. See, "Don't tell me that yet," she said. "Tell me in 2 weeks." See, he looked at her sideways. "You don't want to know when things are going right?" See, "I want to know when I'm sure," she said, "not when I'm hoping." See, he made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Your grandfather did the same thing." See, would never say a battle was won until he'd counted the dead. See, she had not known Holt knew her grandfather, not specifically, but she was learning that this valley held more of Everett Whitlock's history than she had ever been told. See, scattered through the people and the land in ways that kept surfacing when she wasn't expecting them. See, "Tell me more about him," she said. Holt was quiet for a moment. See, he put the measuring rod back against the well wall and looked out over the south pasture, where the grass was already showing a different quality from what it had been a week ago, something greener trying to come through at the roots. See, he was here 3 years before Rusk bought the place, Holt said. See, worked for the previous owner, man named Cutter, who wasn't a bad sort, but wasn't a good businessman either. See, your grandfather ran the south section mostly. He had a system for the cattle rotation that Cutter never fully understood but followed anyway because it worked. He paused. See, when Cutter sold and Rusk came in, your grandfather stayed 2 years and then left. See, I don't know where he went after that. He went north, Mara said. See, he had a small claim up near the Ritter Creek section. See, he worked it alone for a few years. Then the lease ran out, and he came back down to this part of the valley. She paused. See, that's when he was already sick. That's when he took the work at Iron Creek, and that's when he brought me. See, how old were you? 7 when he brought me. 12 when he died. See, Holt nodded slowly. He worked hard those years, never complained. See, never explained himself to Rusk, which Rusk resented, because Rusk was the kind of man who needed people to make him feel like the authority in the room. He looked at her. See, your grandfather was not that kind of man. He just did the work and went quiet in the evenings. See, she looked out at the pasture. The rain had stopped an hour ago, and the sky was doing something complicated with clouds and late afternoon light. See, he gave me a pipe once, she said, or he tried to. See, I was about 10, told me to try it. She paused. I was sick for 2 days. See, he thought it was hilarious. Holt laughed. A real one. See, the kind that surprised him as it came out. She smiled, which felt strange on her face in a good way, the way something does when you haven't used a muscle in a while and you suddenly do. See, he was funny, she said. People didn't always see that. See, he was quiet, so they thought he was stern, but he had a very specific sense of what was ridiculous, and he would just look at a ridiculous thing until you understood that he found it ridiculous. She stopped. See, I miss him differently now than I did at 12. At 12, I missed him like a hole. See, now I miss him like a conversation I keep thinking of things to add to. See, Holt said nothing for a moment. That's about right, he said finally. See, that's about how it goes. The rain was fully over by the 5th morning. See, the sky cleared hard and blew the way it does after a long rain in dry country. Everything washed and definite, the edges of things visible in a way they hadn't been through the weeks of drought dust. See, the cattle were moving differently in the pastures, more purposefully, and Mara watched them from the east fence line on the morning of the 5th day and noted the change the way she noted everything now. See, in the running account she kept in her head of what the ranch was telling her. See, she had been keeping that account since the first morning. See, she suspected she would keep it for the rest of her life. See, the news from Red Hollow came with Pruitt, who arrived mid-morning of the 5th day looking considerably more relaxed than any of his previous visits. See, he told her at the kitchen table, reached an agreement with Alcott regarding the remaining portion of the supply debt. Alcott had reconsidered the hay trade and found it more than fair, and had, furthermore, mentioned to 2 other merchants who were watching the new Iron Creek situation with interest that the new owner was someone worth doing business with, honestly. See, word travels in Red Hollow, Pruitt said. I know it does, she said. See, what's it saying? He looked at his coffee. Mixed, he said, which she appreciated because it was true. See, some people think you won't last a season. Some people think well. See, there are people who don't think a 17-year-old girl should be running a cattle operation, and they're saying so. See, and the rest, she said. The rest are waiting to see, he said. See, which is about the best you can hope for from people who don't know you yet. See, she thought about that. Waiting to see is fine, she said. See, waiting to see means they're still paying attention. See, that's something to work with. He left with the signed payment schedule, and she stood at the gate watching him go and thought about what he'd said. See, the people who thought she wouldn't last a season. See, she was not going to pretend that didn't matter to her, because it did, not because she needed their approval, but because she understood that reputation was a practical thing in a small valley. See, that whether merchants extended credit, and whether neighbors cooperated, and whether the next person she needed to negotiate with came to the table in good faith, depended on what the surrounding community believed about her capacity and her character. See, that was not vanity. That was just how things worked. See, she was going to have to show them. Over time, consistently in small accumulations, the way trust was always built, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the long, reliable sequence of doing what you said and saying what you meant. See, she could do that. She had been doing that her whole life without anyone giving her credit for it. See, doing it now, where the credit would actually land in a useful place, seemed almost straightforward by comparison. See, almost. The letter from Elias arrived on the 8th day after the rain. See, she recognized Forsyth's handwriting on the outside of the envelope, which meant it had come through official channels rather than by private writer, which meant Elias had wanted it documented. See, she opened it at the kitchen table in the early morning before anyone else was up. See, it was not a long letter. It was in Elias's own hand, which she recognized from the notes he'd left alongside Forsyth's paperwork the morning he departed. See, a clean, precise script that moved across the page, with the efficiency of someone who wrote because they needed to say something and not because they enjoyed the act of writing. See, he asked after the ranch. He said the rain had reached Red Hollow too, and that he hoped it had done what was needed at Iron Creek. See, he mentioned, briefly and without elaboration, that Calder Boone had accepted a reduced charge in exchange for information about Gideon Rusk's cattle fraud, and that the information had been useful to the county's investigation. See, and that Gideon was currently in Red Hollow having a difficult series of conversations with several officials that were likely to become more difficult before they became easier. See, then he wrote something she read twice before she set the letter down. See, he wrote, "My father used to say that the debts worth keeping are the ones you can never fully repay, because they mean someone did something for you that was beyond calculation." See, I am beginning to understand what he meant. I don't know that I've repaid yours or your grandfather's. See, I suspect the more accurate description is that I've tried to do something commensurate with what was done, and those are different things. See, I hope you know the difference too. What you did in that barn was not a transaction. See, don't let anything that came after make it feel like one. See, she set the letter on the table. She thought about what he'd written for a long time. See, she thought about the version of herself that had knelt in the straw at 4 a.m, cleaning a stranger's wounds by lamplight, and whether that person had known then what she was starting. See, she didn't think so. She thought she had just been herself, which was a person who could not look at someone hurting and decide it wasn't her problem. See, which was something her grandfather had given her and which she had sometimes resented as an inconvenient quality to have, and was now sitting at this table on this land in the clear morning after 4 days of rain. See, no longer sure she would trade it away if she could. See, she folded the letter and put it with the other documents she was keeping. See, then she picked up her boots and her coat and went out to check the creek level. See, the creek was running clear that morning for the first time. See, the initial runoff that had turned it brown was moving through, and what was beneath it was clean water, cold and clear, catching the early light in a way that made you stop and look at it even if you were in a hurry. See, even if you had 100 things to do before noon. See, she crouched at the bank and put her hand in and let the cold run through her fingers, and she stayed there for a long moment, just letting it. See, then she stood up and went back to work. Wes Talbot came to the ranch on the 12th day after the rain. See, she saw him from the porch before he came through the gate, recognized him from the trail, the younger hand, who had ridden out with Calder that morning. See, who had sat on his horse while Calder threw her bag in the dirt and grabbed her arm and shoved her down, who had said, I don't know when, Elias asked him if he would have stopped it. See, she watched him come up the road on a horse that was not as well kept as it had been, when it was an Iron Creek horse, and she thought about what she was going to do. See, she had thought about Wes several times since that morning. See, not with anger exactly, though there had been anger in the early days when she was tired and the problems were pressing and the memory of lying in the trail dust was still fresh enough to be physical. See, the anger had moved through, and what was under it was more complicated, something that recognized the difference between Calder Boone, who had chosen cruelty deliberately and with satisfaction, and Wes Talbot, see, who had followed it because following was easier, and because at 23 he had not yet made enough decisions of his own to know what kind of person he was going to decide to be. See, she understood that. She was 17. She understood the particular confusion of not yet being sure what you stood for because you hadn't been tested enough times to know. See, he stopped his horse at the gate. He took his hat off. See, Miss Whitlock, he said. Wes, she said, a pause. See, I came to ask if there's work, he said. He said it with the flat directness of someone who has rehearsed the longer speech and then discarded it and decided the plain version was more honest. See, I know I don't have much standing to ask. I know what I did. See, what I didn't do. He held her gaze with some effort. See, Mr. Vane gave me a choice that morning, and I've been thinking about it since. See, about which way I went. She studied him. Which way did you go, she said. See, I went back to the ranch and I collected my wages from Rusk and I left, he said. See, I didn't want to work for him anymore, and I didn't work for anyone else these past weeks. See, I've been camped out by the Ritter Creek section, trying to figure out what I thought. He turned his hat in his hands. See, what I think is that I should have stopped Calder. See, I didn't. And I should have said something to you or to someone earlier about what Calder was doing to the water numbers. Because I knew something was wrong there, and I didn't say it either. He looked at her directly. See, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking if there's work. See, she was quiet for a moment. She thought about what Holt had said, that people worked differently when they felt like their choices mattered. See, she thought about the fact that Wes was 23 and had made decisions she wouldn't have made, and was standing at her gate, having apparently spent several weeks sitting with that fact until it made him get on his horse and ride here. See, she thought about what it cost a person to do that. See, she was not a person who confused doing the hard right thing with having already done it. See, Wes had not done the right thing when it mattered. See, but he was here, he was looking her in the eye. He was not making excuses or building justifications. See, he was just saying, see, I got it wrong. See, and I know it. See, and I'm asking. See, that was not nothing. There's work, she said. I'm a hand down with Calder gone, and the east section needs someone who knows cattle well enough to manage the rotation schedule without watching every hour. She paused. See, pays on time every 2 weeks. You'll report to Holt for the first month. While I see how you work, she held his gaze. See, if I give you information and you sit on it because it's easier, you're gone. See, I run this ranch on what's actually true, not what's convenient. See, that's not negotiable. Understood, and Wes, she said. See, he looked at her. If you see something wrong, you come to me. See, you don't wait. You don't decide whether I can handle it. See, you come to me. Yes, ma'am, he said. I'm 17, she said. See, don't call me ma'am. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one. See, what do I call you? Mara, she said, or Miss Whitlock in front of people you want to confuse. She came down off the porch. See, put your horse in the east paddock and find Holt. See, tell him I said the north rotation needs 2 people on it today. See, he went. She watched him go and thought about all the ways that decision could go wrong, and all the ways it might go right. And then she stopped thinking about it and went to write the morning water numbers in the ledger. See, the debt problem resolved itself by degrees over the following weeks, the way most practical problems do when you stop trying to solve them all at once and start solving the parts you can reach. See, Pruitt's negotiations with the remaining merchants concluded at the end of the 4th week, a formal payment schedule signed by all parties and filed with the county clerk's office in Red Hollow, see, which Forsyth had recommended because a filed agreement had more weight than a handshake arrangement, and she had learned enough in the preceding weeks to understand why weight mattered in agreements. See, the back wages she handled differently. See, she had thought about it for the full 4 weeks, turning it over at night when the accounts were spread on the kitchen table and the lamp was low, looking at the numbers from every angle she could think of, and what she finally landed on was this. See, she could not pay the full 2 months immediately, but she could be honest about when she could, and she could add something to the forward wages while the back payment was worked off over time. See, so that the men were seeing something better than they'd had before, even while waiting for the debt to be resolved. See, she sat the hands down at the kitchen table, all of them. Pete and Holt and Tommy and Curtis and Wes, everyone currently on payroll, and she put the account book in the middle of the table and she showed them the numbers. See, the actual numbers. What was there and what wasn't, and what the timeline looked like if the cattle held through the season, and what it looked like if they didn't. See, nobody spoke for a moment after she finished. Tommy looked at the numbers. See, you're showing us your books, he said. Yes, she said. See, Rusk never, I know Rusk never, she said. I'm not Rusk. She looked at each of them in turn. See, you're working this ranch too. You deserve to know what shape it's in. See, if something changes, I'll tell you before you have to ask me. She paused. See, that's how it is here. Pete looked at the forward wage line. See, he looked at it for a long time with the expression of someone adding things up. See, then he looked up. That's better than what Rusk was paying, he said. See, even with the back amount pending, yes, she said. See, it is. Holt put his hand flat on the table, which was his version of a declaration. See, that works, he said. The others nodded, each in their own way, and they went back to work, and she sat at the table after they'd gone and let herself feel, briefly and privately, see, the particular satisfaction of a problem that had seemed insurmountable when she first looked at it turning out to be a problem that had a solution you could live with. See, not a perfect solution, it never was, but real, Elias came back to the valley 6 weeks after he'd left. See, he came with 2 riders instead of 6, which she read as a different kind of visit than the first one. See, he came through the main gate at late afternoon, and she was at the fence line with Wes going over the rotation schedule when she saw the horses come in, and she said to Wes to finish the count without her and walked back across the yard. See, he looked better than he had. The swelling was long gone from his face. See, he was moving with less visible care around the ribs, though she noticed when he swung down from his horse that he still favored the right side slightly. See, which was not unusual for ribs that had been as damaged as his were, and which would probably be that way for another month or 2. See, the creek's running, he said, looking at the sound of it from where they stood in the yard. See, 4 days of rain, she said. 3rd well is back to viable draw. See, east fence is holding. Alcott's squared away, and Pruitt's arrangement is filed with the county. She paused. See, back wages are on a schedule, and everyone's still here. See, he looked at her. You've been busy, I told you I would be. See, he almost smiled. It was a thing his face did that wasn't quite a full smile, one corner of it, a slight shift in the eyes. See, she had catalogued it over the weeks without meaning to. See, can I see the creek? He said. They walked to the creek bank together, leaving his riders in the yard with Pete pointing them toward the water trough. See, the afternoon was warm without being brutal, the first such afternoon in weeks, the first turnoon in weeks, and the creek was running clear and steady. In the light, the bank on either side showing the beginning of green coming back at the waterline. See, Marsh came to buy me out, she said as they stood at the bank. See, I know, he said. He mentioned it in Red Hollow. See, he said you turned him down without much deliberation. See, I deliberated, she said. I just didn't deliberate long. See, why not? She thought about how to say it. Because this land was my grandfather's before it was Rusk's, and I didn't know that until I was already here standing on it. See, and because selling it would have meant the thing I was given got used as a way station. She looked at the water. See, I didn't want it to be a way station. He was quiet for a moment. See, what do you want it to be? A thing that lasts, she said. See, a thing with my name on it that means something in 20 years, not just now. See, he nodded. He looked at the creek. Gideon Rusk is going to trial next month, he said. See, the cattle fraud is documented clearly enough that his attorney has advised him to cooperate. See, he'll lose whatever he has left and pay significant penalties. He paused. See, I wanted you to know before you heard it from someone in town. See, will he come back here, she said. I don't think so, Elias said. See, there's nothing for him here now. She thought about Gideon. See, she thought about the version of him she'd glimpsed in the barn. That first morning, the man who had looked at a dying stranger and seen nothing worth saving, who had looked at a girl he'd employed for 5 years and seen nothing worth protecting. See, who had built 20 years of work into debt and fraud and ended it by disappearing through his own front gate with 2 bags. See, she thought about all the places Gideon had made the wrong choice and how early in his life those choices had probably started and how impossible it was to know from the outside. See, where a person went from being someone who might have been different to someone who was just who they were. See, she didn't feel sorry for him exactly, but she had stopped being angry at him with the kind of anger that costs you something to carry. See, he was just a fact of her life now, a thing that had happened, a condition that had led to the place she was standing. See, he hired me for 5 years and paid me poorly and fired me for doing something right, she said. See, in a strange way, the only meaningful thing he ever gave me was the morning he pointed a rifle at me and told me to leave that man to die. See, Elias looked at her. Because you didn't, he said. See, because I didn't, she said. They stood at the creek for a while longer. See, the water moved past them, unhurried, the way water moves when it's found its level and is going where it intends to go. See, how's the arm? Healed, he said, mostly. See, there's a place where the bone set slightly wrong. See, doctor in Red Hollow says it won't cause trouble in normal use. See, and the ribs. Better, he said. Still notice them if I turn sharp left. See, I know, she said. I noticed it 6 weeks ago. He looked at her sideways. See, you noticed that. I notice most things, she said. See, it's something my grandfather installed in me that I've never found the off switch for. See, he almost smiled again. She had decided she liked that specific expression on his face because it was real in a way that full smiles on people she didn't know well often weren't. See, I have a proposition, he said. He turned slightly to face her carefully, and she saw the left side consciousness she recognized. See, not about the ranch. The ranch is yours and complete as far as any business between us goes. He paused. See, I have a water rights negotiation coming up in this county that requires someone who understands local land and water in detail. See, someone who knows the valley wells and creek systems and how the drought has changed the draw rates. He paused again. See, I'd like to hire you as a consultant. It would require 2 or 3 days in Red Hollow next month, with Forsyth present, going over the county water maps. See, she looked at him. You have people who do this kind of work for you. See, I have people who read documents, he said. I don't have anyone who spent the last 6 weeks managing a working ranch through the tail end of an 11-month drought and recovering it. He met her eyes. See, you know things that my people don't know and that I can't pay someone to pretend to know. See, she thought about it. 2 or 3 days. Forsyth present, which meant it was formal and above board. See, something that would take her off the ranch for a few days, which was itself a thing she needed to figure out how to do, how to leave a place she was responsible for, and trust that it would function in her absence. See, Holt could manage it, she knew that, but knowing it and being comfortable with it were still slightly different things. See, what are the terms, she said. He told her. It was a fair number. See, she would have accepted less, but she didn't tell him that. See, all right, she said. All right, he said. They walked back from the creek as the last of the afternoon light was going and the ranch was around them in the beginning of evening. See, the hands finishing their work and the cattle settled in the pastures and the sound of the creek audible now in a way it hadn't been for months, a consistent low sound of water doing what water does when it has enough of itself to do it properly. See, supper that evening was the same as it had been since the first week, all the hands at the kitchen table, food that was plain but was enough. See, and the particular noise of people who had been working hard all day and had earned the right to stop for an hour. See, Elias ate with them, which she had not required or even suggested, but which seemed like the natural thing, and which he did without ceremony. See, sitting beside Holt and asking him about the North Section cattle numbers with the genuine attention of a man who was actually interested in the answer. See, Holt gave him the real numbers. She noticed that. Holt did not round them or soften them or present the favorable version. See, he gave the honest count and talked through the implications, and Elias listened without performing comprehension he didn't have, asking questions when he didn't understand something and not asking them when he did. See, after supper, the hands drifted back to the bunkhouse, and she and Elias sat at the table with coffee and the account book open between them, not because there was anything urgent in it, but because they were both the kind of people who were more. See, comfortable with a purpose visible between them than with nothing at all. See, you've done something real here, he said. He said it simply, looking at the account book. See, in 6 weeks, I've started something, she said. See, that's different from doing it. It is, he said. See, but starting is the part that doesn't happen without the right person. See, she looked at the account book, at the numbers in it that were real numbers, hard numbers, the shape of a thing that was genuinely hers. See, she thought about the morning she'd left this ranch with $12 in her boot and a worn bag in her grandfather's locket. See, she thought about how close that version of the morning had been to a version where she had just kept walking, where she had not gone into that barn, where she had heard something and told herself it was not her business. See, that version of the morning was close enough that she could still see it from here. See, she had not taken it, not because she was brave, not in any grand cinematic sense. See, she was not sure she had been brave at all in that barn. See, brave suggests a choice made against strong resistance, a heroic overcoming. See, what she had done felt more ordinary than that. She had just looked at a thing that needed doing and done it The same way she'd checked the water troughs every morning at 4 a. See, mem for 5 years. Not because it was glorious, but because the cattle needed water and nobody else was going to check at 4 in the morning. See, integrity as habit rather than performance. That was what her grandfather had modeled in his quiet, self-contained way, and what she had absorbed without being explicitly taught. See, she thought about that, about what gets handed down between people not through instruction but through proximity. See, her grandfather had never sat her down and told her who to be. See, he had just been who he was every day, in the plain, unremarkable way of someone who had no other way to be, and she had grown up watching that, and had become, apparently, more like him than she had known. See, can I ask you something? She said. Elias looked up. See, yes, your father, she said, after the war, after he came home. See, did what happened to him change him? Elias was quiet for a moment. See, he turned his coffee cup in his hands. My father was a very careful man before the war, he said. See, not timid, just careful, deliberate. He thought about everything twice. He paused. See, after the war he was still deliberate, but he had a quality to him that wasn't there before. See, a kind of patience with difficulty. Like he understood that hard things were sometimes just the shape of the path, and you walked them the same as you walked the easy parts. He looked at the table. See, he used to say that the worst thing about the hardest moments in his life was that he'd survived them, because surviving them meant he could no longer pretend he was the kind of person who needed the path to be easy. See, she thought about that for a long time. Your grandfather gave him that, Elias said. See, not just his life, that way of seeing things. Because someone stayed when they didn't have to, my father spent 40 more years knowing what it looked like when a person chose the hard right thing. He paused. See, that's not a small inheritance. She reached into her pocket. See, she had been carrying the pipe with her since the morning after Elias left. Not in a bag, not put away, just in her coat pocket the way her grandfather had always carried it. See, she put it on the table between them. He looked at it. See, he carried this in that mountain pass, she said. See, he did. And he gave it to your father, because he wanted him to have something to smoke if they made it out. See, yes, she looked at the pipe on the table. He was a practical man, she said. See, he wasn't sentimental about things. If he gave your father something, it was because he thought your father might need it. She paused. See, I think he also just wanted him to have something of his. See, something that said, I was here with you. Elias looked at the pipe, and she could see that it cost him something. That particular look, something quiet and old. See, yes, he said, I think that too. She picked the pipe up and held it for a moment. See, then she did something she had not planned to do, had not thought about doing, that came from somewhere below the level of planning. See, she held it out to him. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. See, your grandfather gave it to my father, she said. See, your father gave it to you. You gave it to me. She held his gaze. See, I think it's supposed to travel. I think that's what it does. She paused. See, take it back. Not because I don't want it, because it connecting us matters more than it staying in one place. See, he was still for a long moment. Then he reached out and took the pipe from her hand. See, he held it the same way she had held it, the weight of it, the worn bowl, the smooth stem, and she could see that he knew exactly how it felt because he had held it before, had grown up watching his father hold it. See, when I have a son, he said, and then he stopped. See, she waited. When I have a son, he said again, I'll give it to him. See, and I'll tell him the story from the beginning. Tell him the whole thing, she said. See, the mountain pass and the barn and all of it. I will, he said. See, he put the pipe in his own coat pocket. She watched it disappear there and felt something settle in her, not the loss of it, but the rightness of where it had gone, the sense of a thing in its correct place doing what it was supposed to do. See, the lamp burned low between them. Outside, the valley was quiet in the way it was only quiet after a long, dry season that had broken, a different quality of quiet than the drought quiet, less like held breath and more like sleep. See, she closed the account book. I'll come to Red Hollow next month, she said. See, for the water rights consultation. I'll have Forsyth arrange it, he said. See, she nodded. She picked up the lamp and turned it down further, and they both stood up from the table with the natural ease of two people who have gotten comfortable enough in each other's presence that departure doesn't require managing. See, he left in the morning the same as before. And the same as before, she heard the horses in the yard and did not go out. Let the morning have its ordinary shape. See, but this time she stood at the window of the room she had made her own, the small room at the end of the hall. See, her grandfather's pipe no longer on the dresser, but gone with the man who was going to carry it forward, and she watched Elias ride out through the gate and down the road toward Red Hollow. See, and she thought about all the ways a single choice branches. See, one choice in a barn at 4 in the morning, a lifetime of consequence spreading out from it in every direction. See, she thought about her grandfather in that mountain pass, looking at 7 wounded men and making the decision not to leave them. See, she thought about how he had never spoken of it, how he had come home and lived his life and raised her and died without once suggesting that the world owed him anything for what he'd done. See, he had just done it and carried it in the ordinary way he carried everything, without ceremony, without expectation. See, she had done what she had done in that barn the same way. See, not thinking about what it meant or what it would become. See, just looking at what needed doing and doing it. The thing she understood now that she hadn't understood then was that integrity practiced in private doesn't stay private. See, it moves. It leaves marks. It becomes the thing that other people carry forward without always knowing where it came from. See, her grandfather had given Thomas Vane a life and a wooden pipe in a frozen mountain pass. And 40 years later, that act was still traveling, still showing up in unexpected places. See, still determining the shape of things for people who had never stood in that pass and never would. See, she wondered sometimes if that was the most honest thing she could say about what mattered in a person's life. See, not the big visible things, not the declared moments of decision. See, but the pattern of it, the daily accumulated practice of being who you were when you didn't have to perform it for anyone. See, that pattern was the thing that lasted. That pattern was what people carried forward from you after you were gone, whether they knew your name or not. See, she went downstairs and put water on for coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watched the yard come to life in the morning, Pete crossing from the bunkhouse to the equipment shed. See, Wes already out at the east fence line checking the posts the way she'd asked him to start every day. Holt coming from the direction of the creek with the measuring rod, which meant he'd already been to check the level. See, she watched them and thought, these people are working land with my name on the deed. See, that is an extraordinary thing. See, not because of what it meant about her specifically, but because of what it meant about the distance between the girl who had walked out of this ranch with $12 in her boot and the woman standing at this window. See, the distance was not large in terms of weeks. In terms of everything else, it was enormous. See, Holt knocked on the kitchen doorframe. Creaks at 18 inches, he said. See, best reading in 7 months. She looked at him. See, say it, he looked at her. Say it, she said again. See, he almost smiled. We're going to be all right, he said. See, she nodded. She turned back to the window. Yes, she said. See, we are. The morning opened out around Iron Creek Ranch, clear and unhurried, the grass coming green at the edges of the pastures, the cattle moving with purpose in the east section, the creek running steady and clean in the distance. See, there was work to do. There was always work to do, and she knew the shape of it now in a way she hadn't 6 weeks ago. See, knew which problems had solutions, and which ones required patience, and which ones were just the permanent condition of trying to make something real out of difficult ground. See, she poured her coffee. She opened the account book to the morning's page. See, she wrote the date at the top. She wrote the creek level that Holt had given her. See, she wrote the cattle count from the previous evening's tally. See, she wrote the numbers the way she always wrote them, plain, real, no version that was easier to look at than the truth. See, just what was actually there. It was not a perfect ranch. See, it was not a perfect life. See, the east fence would need attention again next season, And the third well was still not what it had been before the drought, and there were 2 months of back wages still on the schedule, and the water rights consultation in Red Hollow next month was going to require her to sit in a room full of men considerably older than her and hold her ground on things she knew better than they did. None of it was easy. None of it was what she would have designed if she'd been designing a life from scratch. It was hers. She had earned it, and the only way anything worth keeping is actually earned not by wanting it, not by being given it, but by being the kind of person who would kneel in the straw at 4 a.m. and help a dying stranger. Not because of what it would become, but simply because it was the right thing to do. She closed the account book. She picked up her boots. She went to the door. The morning was waiting for her, full of work and difficulty, and everything she was still learning, and she walked out into it the same way her grandfather had walked into everything steadily, without performance. Carrying what she carried in the quiet, ordinary way of someone who knows that what you do when no one is watching is the only version of yourself that actually counts. The creek ran clear in the distance. The valley breathed around her. Iron Creek Ranch, owned and worked, and slowly becoming what she intended it to be, spread out under the wide morning sky. She got to work.